Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1544 of the War Near Stream. And today, the world decided to go berserk on a Sunday. It's a really strange thing, but we've seen today that Moscow was struck yet again in another massive Ukrainian attack. We're seeing fires all over the place, and we have tons of footage of that. We're also seeing that Cuba has allegedly begun planning a drone attack on Florida and also U.S. naval vessels. That's brand new as of today as well. And also, Iran decided to attack the Gulf states and also attacked a UAE nuclear facility today, and we have major news, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we have been able to hear of significant developments from the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and also the United States of America over the course of this day. According to information that we've been able to see coming out of Moscow over the course of the entire day, the city of Moscow has been overwhelmed, quite literally, by Ukrainian drone attacks that have now swarmed into the central area of the city and have caused a significant amount of damage to critical Russian infrastructure, factories, and also facilities throughout the entirety of the area of the city of Moscow. At this moment, we've also been able to confirm that the Bars cruise missile was used by the armed forces of Ukraine in the attack as well, confirming that for the first time in recorded history, the city of Moscow has actually come under a cruise missile attack to some extent. In the midst of this, the Russian Federation has been in an active panic, and we have seen that the internal situation within the city can only be described as chaotic at the moment, as some significant interstate overpasses or motorway overpasses have been burned to the ground as a result of some of the fires that were starting because of the Ukrainian drone attacks, and we've also seen that some oil depots within the area, critical for the city's function, have also been knocked out as well. 'Tis quite a shame. We have also been able to hear at the same time that, according to credible sources, the communist Cubans are only weeks away from developing drones of mass destruction that will be attempting to target the state of Florida. And while I just phrased that as a bit of a joke, it actually appears that this intelligence is somewhat credible at the moment. And according to some U.S. intelligence, it has now come forward that the communist Cubans are in the possession of approximately 300 attack drones, possibly of the Shahed 136 variety, and it appears that that they have a capable range of 300 miles from Cuba, meaning that most of the entirety of southern Florida could be under the threat of an incoming drone attack from the communist Cubans at some point in the future, which does appear to be showing us, at least at the moment, that the United States of America may have more significant reasons for a cause of war against the Cubans than just mere ideological differences and possibly a national security threat that may be posed to the citizenry of the United States of America. We have also been able to hear, additionally, that at the same time, inside the Middle East, there's also been some very significant developments within this area today as well, as the Islamic Republic of Iran conducted a drone attack today within the United Arab Emirates, with some of their drones splashing down near to the area of a nuclear power plant just south of Abu Dhabi. The UAE has condemned these attacks in the strongest terms, and we've also been able to see, additionally, that there has been a MQ-9 Reaper that has been shot down in Houthi lands in western Yemen, and we've also gotten additional reports of significant Air Force activity of the United States Air Force over northern Iraq once more. We've also been able to get some pretty interesting information out of the front lines in Ukraine, as it does appear that the Ukrainian armed forces have been able to hold the Russians back, and we've also been able to hear some light updates, at least at this moment, on the general foreign policy situation with the People's Republic of China and the current situation in which we find ourselves with them and our future in East Asia as a result of the prior visit by the President of the United States. We have a significant amount of news to cover tonight, and I've got to say, folks, that it is an unbelievably massive amount of news that we have to cover. I also want to make it clear that tonight is a special night here on the channel. It is the Sunday fundraiser night for none other than Razom For Ukraine, an absolutely incredible nonprofit that has been helping out with humanitarian situations in Ukraine for years and helps for the Ukrainian state to be able to divert more of its attentions and spending towards the war effort, while folks like us here in the United States help to support nonprofits like Razom that help out on the humanitarian front, alleviating a lot of pressure off of the Ukrainian government and letting them focus on trying to end the war in Ukraine faster rather than later. And so hopefully we'll be able to see.
Honestly, it's going pretty well already. It looks like we're already at $400+ raised already at the $2,500 goal. So going pretty strong, by the way. And also, we have fundraised for Razom for several times in a row. So really good fundraiser, and hopefully the people donate to it, because it does help the Ukrainians in the midst of this war. And as you'll see today, the Ukrainians have been very busy, to say the least.
And it certainly does appear that they have been incredibly busy. And of course, folks, outside of the fundraiser night, hopefully we'll be able to see that we can hit the $2,500 goal for this fundraiser very soon. Hopefully we'll be able to see the LSA can rally and hit that fundraiser goal like no other. But in the meantime, we are going to be moving on into all of our breaking news, starting with the largest stories first, and then moving our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. Just to let y'all know, our news segment this day is going to be actually a little bit specific and very particular in how we cover it because of the events that we've been able to hear of in the United States, and I know that a lot of people like to hear about that. So we're going to cover the entirety of the Moscow attack situation and news coverage there, and then we're immediately going to be hopping out of Europe and then moving straight on over and into Cuba to cover the analysis and news that we have out of communist Cuba over the course of this day with the new information that we just got in the public as of this moment. But moving us on and into our largest story of the day, we are going to be moving on and into the area of the city of Moscow. The city of Moscow has come under a second major drone attack over the course of the past 24 hours, and quite particularly just within the past few hours. From what we've been able to tell, it does appear that according to the Russian Federation, they have announced that across the entirety of the Russian Federation, in 24 hours, 1,054 Ukrainian drones and apparently 8 bombs, or flying bombs as the Russians are calling them, were launched into the Russian Federation. I don't know what they mean by 8 flying bombs or something along those lines. We don't really know what that is or what they're describing that to be, but we can definitely tell that it was a large amount of drones have been launched into the Russian Federation at this moment by the armed forces of Ukraine, and from how the Moscow air defense scenario has been unfolding over the day, it is not looking like the Russians were able to handle this well whatsoever. To give you all some of our first clips that we got in the day as the drones started to make their way towards the Moscow air defense perimeter, we were able to see the Ukrainians started to put out pictures while the drones were attacking Moscow of some of the inscriptions that they've written onto them, with one of them having the inscription, "Moscow never sleeps," written onto it, which is going to become accurate apparently, because I assume that they're planning to do this on the near daily. We also got to see that another drone actually had a inscription on it that said "From Kyiv to Moscow," and then specifically the Kremlin at the back as well, showing that the Ukrainians had actually spritzed up a lot of their drones for the festivities of the attacks that were to come, meaning that a lot of these drones that flew into the Moscow air defense perimeter actually had inscriptions written on them by their Ukrainian operators before they even made it into the Moscow air defense perimeter and took off for their now famous flight into the Moscow city area. We were able to see that before the drones arrived, someone was able to map out all of the air defenses around the city of Moscow, and each one of these dots is showing a different type of an air defense system. Some of them are Pantsir S-1s, a decent amount of them in the outer perimeter, the largest area of the dense circle, are actually S-300 and S-400 radars and also TELs, and then there's a decent amount of Pantsir S-1s within the heart of the city of Moscow. Outside on the very farthest perimeters are some missile-based air defenses, but these can be of a wide variety. They could be S-400s, S-300s, Pantsir S-1s, Tunguskas, or another variant of an air defense system like the Tor. We just don't really know for sure because there hasn't been a lot of information on these more sparse air defenses that make out the first very outer air defense perimeter, but we do know that the actual solidified air defense perimeter around the very outskirts of Moscow was engaged today by the Ukrainian drones, and they started to make it through fast. We have actually seen at no other point in this conflict that Ukrainian drones in such a large number have been able to make it through the Moscow air defense perimeter, and not only that, hit targets throughout the entirety of the city of Moscow. Over the course of this day, we have been able to confirm that a minimum of 6 major targets have been hit within the area of the city of Moscow, with the last count for an attack of this type ever being seen being 1 major target that was hit near Zelenograd nearly a year ago in a prior Ukrainian attack on the city of Moscow. Moving us on into the clips of the incoming drones, we were actually able to see quite some telling signs and indicators of how this went. Here is a clip here actually showing the Russian air defense attempting to engage one of these drones as they were making it into the air defense perimeter. We see them looking up. We hear the drone.
Oh,
and there was a pigeon. Like there.
Oh man, I tell you, I could have sworn that pigeon. I thought it was over with for the cameraman. I thought that was the drone at first.
Oh, man, that pigeon was jump scaring everybody, man. He was waiting for the perfect moment. But there's the drone way up there. It's that little speck in the sky. And the Russians are about to get this one. We hear the machine guns opening up.
It's not working.
Huh. I swore, Matthew, that the Russian government told me that they got this one. They told me that they shot down all of the drones.
Yeah, I don't think the little small arms fire is really doing much to affect it, really. It looks like, and also this thing's flying super slow. I mean, this drone is moving at like a snail's pace, and it's probably taking hits, I would imagine, but it's not doing anything to it.
But Matthew, I don't understand. The Russian government and Putin, they've always told the truth. They've never lied. What do you mean that this just made it through? I was told before this clip by the Russian government that this drone was shot down successfully, mind you.
Oh, they lie. They lie.
Well, he ain't wrong. They definitely do lie. They certainly did lie about this one.
Сука.
Moving us on out of
this
that.
guy sounds really defeated, by the way. He sounds super defeated that this small arms fire didn't take care of it. He was really shocked, you could tell.
Man, he was really shocked. We're about to see why they're really shocked. The Ukrainians are actually making an embarrassment of Russian air defenses, at least during this attack, because some drones, including this clip here, actually flew in close formation to each other, pretty much highlighting how little air defense there is around Moscow, even with the hundreds of Pantsir S-1s and S-300s and 400s that have been dotted around the entirety of the city. These two drones quite literally flew in close formation into the city. And yet
it appears to have worked pretty decent because it gives the Russians 2 targets to have to hit instead of just the one single drone flying into a single target. So, you know, for example, if they're using missile-based defenses and they have like one missile launcher in an area, they obviously can't hit them both. So if the Russians take down one of them, the other one will definitely get through. So that's interesting. I haven't really seen them use the formation pattern before.
I've never really seen them use this before either, and this may be showing that they believe that the threat that Russian air defense poses is minimal. We also got to see some additional clips as well, actually showing off the first ever recorded use, at least within Moscow, of the Bars cruise missile being used against the city, which we saw in this clip right here. And there it is.
Бля.
Very smooth, very smooth.
Very quiet, honestly.
I would say so. Also, I've seen those being used in other parts of Russia before, mainly along the border areas. Like, for example, I think we've seen them used on Belgrade before, but that's a very close target to Ukraine. This is the longest I've ever seen a Bars cruise missile, which is like a drone missile hybrid, basically. This is the farthest I've ever seen it gone is Moscow.
And let me see if I can show y'all here one of these Bars missiles up close. And this is about the best picture that I can actually get of one right here. And it's a little bit grainy looking, but you can see that it has the hobby drone engine, or the hobby jet engine, on the top of the body of the missile. We can also see some shorter wings. These are always indicative of cruise missile designs. And you can also see the actual tail stabilizers right here as well, and the engine right there. This picture was actually taken by the Russians of a Bars missile that had actually failed to explode, and it ended up being a dud. You can also see another picture of one right here, giving you all an idea of what these things actually look like. But outside of that, we do understand that a decent amount of these were actually used against the city,
Yeah.
and are able to carry a higher explosive ordnance on board than the normal Liudi long-range drones and FP2s that we've seen in the prior clips just moments ago. As Old Warrior Fella threw in a $411 donation to the fundraiser.
Whoa.
Holy smokes!
Very nice. He brought us up to $1,000 raised, so we're about $1,500 already from the goal, and we're just like, I think we're like 10 or 15 minutes in. So very nice. Huge shout out to Old Warrior.
That is crazy, and we are almost halfway to the goal. We're only $250 away from the halfway point and $1,500 away from the fundraiser goal. That is absolutely crazy. And a huge shout out to Old Warrior Fellow once again for throwing in that unbelievable support to the fundraiser. We also got an additional clip of the air defense in Moscow actually getting to shoot down one of the drones.
Прям над нами.
There's the drone,
Ну-ка дай, подожди.
and here goes the shoot down right here.
Damn.
Да.
What was that? 2 missiles going forward or just one? What was that? What was up with the noise?
Just one. The noise, let me see if I can describe it. The first part is just the sound of the missile cracking by because it's going supersonic, and then the second explosion was actually the explosion that hit the drone. That's why you hear those two separate sounding kind of booms.
Yeah, that's wild right there. I'm surprised they didn't hit the civilians again.
Man, that is honestly pretty wild. I mean, really, with Russian air defense, you never truly know. But moving us on out of that clip, we also have then been able to get the clips from inside of the city of what exactly did the Ukrainians get to hit. We can confirm that the Ukrainians did hit a Russian oil refinery within the southeastern area of the city. Unfortunately, we didn't have any video or picture evidence to show of that attack here on air that we could show, so it wasn't able to include those, unfortunately. But if you want to go and look on our Twitter, I believe that we have reposted some of those clips of the explosions and impacts on that refinery within southeastern Moscow. So we can confirm that that was one of the major hits that was landed today within the city area. We also were able to additionally confirm that near to the Izmailovo Kremlin, which is over here on the eastern side of the city and is generally a tourist trap, it appears that Ukrainian drone may have come down near to a major motorway overpass in the area, and it led to an unbelievably large fire breaking out directly below the overpass, which we could see right here. Oddly enough, the Russians didn't shut down the interstate.
Yeah, also that was a warehouse underneath this interstate piece right here, which is a Moscow perimeter road. That was a warehouse, and some people earlier were saying it spontaneously combusted, but according to what I've heard, it was hit by a drone, which caused the fire, and then the warehouse went up like a bundle of like kindling, as you can tell right here, which ended up buckling the interstate further on down the road.
What type of building codes does Russia have where you can build buildings under an overpass?
Honestly, I don't even know. That's a good question, actually. But as you can see, you really don't want to do that. That leads to bad things when a fire breaks out.
The hell is this, Iraq? Like, Iraq builds stuff under their overpasses, but this isn't something you do in a modern, westernized country, which Russia clearly isn't. But that is absolutely insane, building a warehouse under an interstate. Like, if a fire breaks out, obviously it's going to structurally damage the overpass overhead and lead to a collapse. Which we'll get to here in just a second. It did collapse, by the way, folks. We're just about to get to that here in a moment. And we can see, oddly enough, that the Russians hadn't closed down the interstate yet, and the fire had clearly been well established at this point. So it had been going on for about 20 to 30 minutes at that point. We then were able to see an additional clip as well showing the fire from another angle, and it looks like they had finally closed down the motorway or interstate overpass at this point, and Russian emergency services were finally starting to arrive on scene.
It kills me how the Russians never care about their own safety whatsoever. Like you said, they never stop driving across the interstate. Like, most people would see this and be, oh, like, oh, dang, like, we need to, like, probably stop traffic or something or get off the interstate. The Russians are like, whatever. They just, like, drive past this inferno.
Man, honestly, it's insane, really. Like, it's like you would just imagine that they would think that this isn't a good idea. Because some of y'all might remember here in the States that it wasn't too long ago that in the city of Atlanta, Georgia, I believe a homeless person left a shopping cart with like some gasoline and some flammable blankets in it, and it caught on fire, and the fire burned hot enough that it actually collapsed. I think it was the I-285 overpass within one area of the city, and the bridge came down because of structural failure. So it doesn't take a whole lot to burn these bridges to the ground or the overpasses to the ground and see a major structural collapse happen from a fire that burns at just 500 degrees or more. And yet the Russians will still risk it getting on the other overpass or even on that one that's on fire and just driving over it like there's nothing going on, even knowing probably that it's extremely unsafe. And unsafe it certainly was. Video came out a little while later, most likely about 30 minutes later, showing that the bridge structure had actually suffered a structural collapse, and that the overpass was actually sagging as the support columns had already given way under the bridge, and this area was beginning to quite literally implode on itself and down onto the warehouse that was burning below the overpass that had apparently been caught on fire from a prior Ukrainian drone hit. So we can confirm that one of the overpasses near to the Izmailovo Kremlin has actually suffered a structural collapse as of today, and it does appear that the northbound lane is no longer going to be usable on this interstate or motorway, whichever way you would like to call it. So this is also confirming some major infrastructure damage that has been caused in Moscow from the Ukrainian attack today. Not just this, but also including the oil refinery, which was hit in the southeastern area of the city, which unfortunately we couldn't show any clips for. Moving us on out of that, we have also been able to see that near to the Zheleningrad area, the Transneft oil depot has also been hit and caught on fire as well. We were able to confirm that this had been hit yesterday, but according to information that came out today, it was actually hit a second time during this attack as well, ensuring that the fire would continue to blaze and that the damage would persist on this oil storage facility. And you can tell by the base of the fire that there's certainly been a little bit of extra kindling added by some drone attacks. Someone's driving the Lada beater by at 80 miles an hour.
There it goes. Look at it.
Oh,
You're pushing
man.
that thing too hard. It's gonna end up catching on fire like this oil depot over here. Look at that, the whole damn thing. Look at, of course, there's some people, looking at this thing right here on the side of the road. They just can't help themselves.
Look, Baba Yakubli, a massive fire. We must pull over and watch it until it burns out. We then also saw an additional clip of this facility on fire right here.
Ah, yes. Oil rain incoming.
Man, Putin's about to get on TV with that little stupid smug, like, machismo man act that he puts on, and he'll go, the oil situation in Russia isn't that bad. It's quite literally raining oil. We have an abundance of it. Like, man, he's about to start saying some stupid stuff like that. Or, he might be doing something else here in the future.
I think this is the first time that the Muscovites have ever experienced oil rain. This will probably be the first time they've ever had it, because the other ones was way up north at the Ust-Luga ports and stuff like that. They had a whole bunch of like oil fires happening. Also down in Primorsk, they also had that as well. Toward the southern part of Russia, they had some oil fires, and also the lava running through the streets. But this is the first time Moscow's ever had it, which that'll probably scare them more, because that's the more elite people of Russia. So they'll probably be a little bit more shook by it.
Yeah, I would say so. You know, it's kind of funny when you think about it because this is the only place that hasn't had oil rain yet. All of southern Russia had oil rain. Everything near Perm had oil rain. Everything up near Ust-Luga and Primorsk had some oil rain. Now Moscow's finally getting oil rain. So it seems, folks, like the oil monsoon season has arrived in Russia. And we've also been able to see a little bit further north of Zelenograd and near to the area of Solnechnogorsk that there's also been another fire control a fire situation at one of these terminals, and they've been trying to extinguish this one, which isn't technically within the Moscow city area, it's in the Moscow Oblast, over the course of this day.
At least you're not bathing in it this time. You know, last time the Russian firefighters were taking a bath in the foam, which you're not supposed to touch, by the way.
Man, down in Tuamsk, man, they were literally like having like a little like suds fight in it. Like they were picking it up and going, "Hey, I haven't catch," and like throwing a whole bunch of it at each other's faces. They were having a fun time. But it looks like, folks, some parts of Russia have finally gotten foam. It's only taken them 4 years and about 2.5 years of drone attacks hitting oil facilities for them to eventually find some foam. But they do have it. So a big shout out to to everyone in the chat who's saying, "Oh, look, they finally have oil." Well, more so foam. They have an abundance of oil because it does look like they finally got some. And we've also been able to hear some information that came out of Moscow today as well in the midst of this all. Why don't we take a look at the nights in Moscow right now? This is the very night right now that the Russians are going through live on air, and currently it's the twilight hours in Moscow. It's about to become daylight here soon. But this is what the night looked like in Moscow, which, mind you all, some people in America, most people from the Southeast, including ourselves, are going to look at this and be like, "Oh, boo-hoo, this isn't anything huge." But the storms that happen around Moscow, because of the climate and also the environment within that area, are usually fairly tame. And while there are thunderstorms that do occur around Moscow, tornadoes are literally unheard of. And also, on top of that, severe thunderstorms are almost completely unheard of within the area of Moscow. Right after all of this oil smoke started to enter the air, the rains came in from Africa, the ones that have been blessed, of course, in Mali. And they started to rain onto the city, so I'm having a feeling that tomorrow everything's going to look a shade blacker from the oil that's now raining onto the city below. And we've also been able to see that it was a wildly violent thunderstorm that happened over Moscow as well, that is leading people in the city to say that it's hellish and it's like something evil is happening, according to some eyewitnesses, which they don't know it, but a new Putin has been elected in hell. But here's the clip. Opa.
Oh, wow.
And there was another picture from near to the area of the Moscow antenna. We also got this picture as well. Now, I'm not going to lie, folks. I mean, some of this actually is kind of crazy for lightning flashes and whatnot. But once again, showing us that at least right now, right after the Ukrainian drone attack rounded out, they then got one of the most violent thunderstorms that they've had in the area in quite some time, I believe in a couple of years.
Yeah, honestly, you know, I'm not one of these people that finds meaning in everything because, of course, sometimes things just happen at random. But I will admit the timing on this is a little bit weird. It's like, you know, you see one of the largest, literally, actually the largest drone attack on Moscow during the entire 4+ year war. And then right after that, the worst ever thunderstorm and lightning storm you've ever seen, I've ever seen in Moscow. I've never seen anything like this, actually. So definitely, it seems like a sign.
And it definitely does. I also see a lot of people talking about the weather. And I have a feeling, folks, like just being honest, Ryan Hall would be able to tell you all a lot more about the weather in Russia than we would. Like, that's his thing. But from what we know, this is exceptionally rare, wildly rare for the Moscow area. But for everybody here in America, us included, this isn't anything special. But once again, folks, we have to keep in mind that this area of the world doesn't see violent weather elements like this often. Here in the U.S. Southeast, where we used to live in Alabama, this sort of a thing was incredibly common. In Texas and the Midwest, this thing is incredibly common to see a violent thunderstorm like this, and also have tornado warnings coming out in the middle of that as well. But for the Russians, this is something that's practically unheard of. And I can actually tell you all, folks, that tornadoes are so unheard of within this area, and violent storms that get close to making a tornado, kind of like these violent thunderstorms. They are so unheard of in the area that the only time I've met people from abroad, which was in high school and they were foreign exchange students, there was a girl from Kazakhstan and a guy from Ukraine and a guy from Brazil that I met in school. None of them knew, and our area was hit by tornadoes left and right while these people were here, unfortunately for them. But they had never heard of or really knew what a tornado actually was, because it never happened as a weather element in their parts of the world for them to actually have an idea or a need to know on what in the world a tornado even is, much less a violent thunderstorm. So this sort of stuff is wild to the Russians. It looks like hell's coming for them. Here in America, this is just a normal weekday as far as storms go. But still, once again, showing us something a little interesting about what's going on there. We've also been able to hear that as of today, the Russian capital, while it was getting hit and smoke was beginning to plume from the city, was not getting the best of news. Sanctions have now been slapped back onto the Russians by the United States because all of the U.S. Oil sanctions waivers on the Russians have now expired, meaning that the sanctions are now back in effect at this moment, according to Bloomberg reports. The current administration ended the brief period when certain Russian crude sales were permitted, with previous licenses only covering oil already loaded on tankers. And we also were able to hear somehow that Igor Girkin got another statement out of prison today, and this is what he said. Only fools would announce a mobilization in the 5th year of an unsuccessful war, and at a time when the country is already very tired of war, does not want it, and does not believe in victory. With the modern development of weapons of the enemy, the more massive the attack, the more corpses of the attackers with the same very modest results. So it appears
how the hell does he get these messages out of prison like that? Because, I thought the whole reason the Russians threw him in prison was to shut him up, but somehow he's getting messages out. I mean, they ought to call this the letters from Gherkin at this point, because this dude's doing this all the time.
Man, like there's some prisoner that walks by him and Gherkin goes, I have a cold. And the guy leans close and he goes, only fools will announce mobilization in the 50. And then he gets the whole message, pass it on. And then that guy walks away and then somehow gets the letter out or something. I don't know how that's working, actually.
Yeah. I'm really surprised, folks, that Gherkin is still in prison, because you remember Navalny went to prison and he got the poison frog treatment because they didn't want to keep him in prison either. They just wanted to do away with him. So I'm surprised Gherkin's still in prison. I'm kind of very surprised by that.
Also, man, I gotta say, over the years, every picture that's coming out of him is slowly turning him into Kris Kringle from, like, the Rankin Bass movies, like, with that beard. Like, he looks like he's about to come out and go, jingle, 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 you can hear my sleigh bells ring. Man, I mean, like, man, if he keeps that up, he will turn into Santa Claus or Father Frost or something. He'll be freezing kids to death in Russia before long.
And maybe so, possibly. Putin might put him frozen. You never can tell.
Man, Putin might be like, put them on that road construction detail in Siberia. No rations. Like, man, it's like you never know. But outside of that, a lot of people have been talking about the situation with the unbelievably massive attacks that have happened in Moscow today. These attacks, I do have to once again emphasize, are the largest attacks that we've seen against the capital of Russia, the most devastating attacks against the capital of Russia, and have highlighted the complete inefficacy of Russian air defense systems around the entirety of the city. This is the largest concentration of Russian air defenses in the entirety of Russian-controlled territory at the moment right now. And a lot of people are currently speaking on what they believe the next actions might be from the Russians because of what has happened to Moscow today. And Matthew, what are people saying about that right now, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so me and Andrew had a brief debate last night about why Ukraine was doing this to Moscow, because there's clearly a shift happening here. This is the largest multiple attacks we've ever seen on Moscow during the entire 4+ year war. So there's clearly being a strategy change taking place here. So Ukraine is saying that Moscow should expect more major drone strikes until the war comes to an end. And Zelensky even made a statement directly addressing the strategy change here. And he's basically sort of agreeing with what I said last night. I think what the Ukrainians are currently doing, and also what Zelensky's suggesting, is he's trying to put the pressure on the Moscow elite, which generally have more pull with the Putin regime, to try to bring this war to a quicker end. That's what he's trying to do here by attacking Moscow. And it appears to be that Moscow is very rattled after these attacks, and they really should be, because the amount of damage that took place, even with the multiple layers of air defense, was appalling, to say the least. And this is apparently going to start happening on a regular basis until the war comes to an end. So what are your thoughts? It looks like 40% said Putin will retaliate with something awful due to a result of this. 29% said Moscow citizens will rise up soon. And 24% said, nothing will probably change coming out of this whole situation. And I would say this. This will probably prompt Putin to do something crazy. It probably will. But at the same time, though, I think Putin had already made up his mind to do that. Because recall that Zelensky about a week or two ago said that there was intelligence showing that Putin was planning on hitting the decision-making centers inside of Kyiv. So Putin had apparently already made his mind up. So Ukraine, I think, is just saying, screw it. We'll go for it too. And now they're attacking Moscow. Also note, they're not hitting the government buildings, though. Ukraine is falling short of that. They're not hitting Russian government buildings. They're also not hitting the Kremlin either. So they are reserving themselves somewhat. They could hit it if they want, but they're choosing not to. So I think that I really don't know if the Moscow citizens are going to rise up. I'm a little bit doubtful about that, but I think Putin is going to try to retaliate with something larger than usual, but we'll have to see what that is. But Enforcer, what say you?
This attack has been the most damaging one that we've seen so far, over 24 hours, that is. That's including the first wave and the second wave, as this appears to be all a part of a larger attack campaign against Moscow. And so instead of viewing them as individual drone attacks, we're generally viewing them as one large drone attack that has been consisted of several waves at this point. But the damage has been unbelievable to the Moscow city area and also to the structural integrity of the city's defenses, which have now been shown to be woefully inadequate for the kinds of threats that are now being posed to the Moscow city area. To just list the 5 targets that Tendar on Twitter was able to post about, the Durakino pump station and oil depot has been hit. We've seen that one on film and confirmed that just the other day. Leningrad has also taken a couple of direct hits from Russian air defense misfires and also drones impacting around the area. The Sheremetyevo International Airport, runway 6, has also been directly hit by drone forces as well, which at this moment we're a little bit up in the air as to whether that was a deliberate hit or not. We can't tell if electronic warfare interference was involved or that was a legitimate attempt to try and shut down the largest international airport, Moscow. Khimki, which is also a other suburb, has also been hit as well, which, mind you all, we actually did cover this the other day. And Mia Kanino, which is very close to Kinky, is only about 9 miles away from Moscow, and quite punishing for the Russians. I guess you could say that the Muscovites are kind of kinky like that. Get it? Because it's Kimki. But anyways, we also just saw that the Moscow refinery within the southeast of the city was also hit as well, which you can see a picture of right there, and that's probably the best thing that we can show for y'all of proof that the refinery had been hit, is that one still image right here on Tendar's post. We also can confirm that the area of the Izmailovo Kremlin's overpass has also been burned to the ground as well from a Ukrainian drone attack, which is just a little bit north of the Moscow refinery. So if we add all of these hits together, that is 6 major hits that have happened within the Moscow city area, and this is clearly showing us at the moment that the Russians will most likely have to try and make a response somehow. However, I'm doubting that it's going to be anything major. It might just be an increase of their current conventional tactics, because we didn't even see any major response to Operation Spiderweb, which was about as damaging as this attack could be on Russia's image. But we actually have breaking news coming out of this moment right now. So Matthew, what do we got?
Okay, so real quick, we're sticking with our Moscow news for right now, but I have to report this because this is a pretty big deal. We're going into Monday, by the way. The stock market's about to reopen, but the crude oil futures have already opened. We are seeing a pretty bad spike. As you can see right here on the chart, this is not good. Crude oil futures have just jumped up several percent points to 107 and 26 cents from about $104 a barrel. So it appears to be that the oil investors are starting to get a little bit worried, it looks like. I'm not really sure what prompted that or not, because, of course, the situation really hasn't changed very much to a large degree, but something has caused the oil price to go berserk, and it looks like it's going up quite tremendously right now. So we'll continue monitoring that throughout the stream and see how high it's going to get, but it is jumping up quite a bit.
It certainly does look like it is jumping up quite a good bit at this moment, and that might be showing us that there may be some information circling around right now about the oil situation due to the blockade and the Hormuz. But we'll be touching on that topic here a little bit in the near future. But moving us on out of our Moscow news, it is now time for us to move on to the news that I'm pretty sure a lot of people are here to listen about tonight, which is, of course, major news coming out of Moscow for sure, but there's also major news that's been coming out of the Americas today, particularly with the situation pertaining to the communist Cubans. As many of y'all know, Communist Cuba is an island nation 90 miles south of the Keys in Florida. This means that it is one of the closest unfriendly nations to the United States of America, and recently we have been able to see that a significant amount of ire has been leveraged by the President of the United States of America for generally unknown reasons publicly against the Communist Cubans, and that there's been statements that we are going to attempt to conduct some sort of a military regime change in their country, forcibly either invading or conducting armed action against the Communist Cuban nation to be able to see that their government is overthrown and a pro-American one is installed. We generally have not seen any real justification strategically where Cuba would pose any form of a threat significant enough to justify some form of an armed conflict, but it appears today that some sort of a leak has been made by U.S. Officials to the press that may be giving some indication that we have not heard about prior as to why these sorts of statements have been made publicly about the Cubans. So getting us on into that information today, I'm just going to read y'all the significant information that's been given on these allegations today, instead of our paraphrase version, which is the second one that's also here in Havana, Cuba. According to information that has been given to the press today, specifically Axios, Cuba has acquired more than 300 military drones and has been discussing attack plans on the U.S. base at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, along with U.S. military vessels and possibly Key West, Florida, per Axios. Details include 1. The threat is being described as a potential pretext for U.S. military action. 2. The CIA Director John Ratcliffe traveled to Cuba on Thursday and warned officials against engaging in hostilities. 3. More U.S. sanctions against Cuba could be announced this week. 4. U.S. intelligence says Cuba has been acquiring attack drones of varying capabilities from Russia and Iran since 2023. To once again reiterate, much like Obese letter states, the Key West is only 90 miles north of Cuba. We understand that these drones may be of the Shahed or Garan 2 variety from the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Russian Federation, which would give them an attack range of anywhere in between 300 to 700 miles depending on their variant. If they have a 300-mile attack range and they were fired from the most northern points of the Cuban islands, these drones could easily start reaching about as close to Tampa inside of Florida. With an attack range of 700 miles, these drones could actually start to reach up towards our home city of Birmingham, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, and a significant amount of the military bases and facilities that exist all the way from New Orleans and in that arc here within the southeastern United States. This is a bit of a strategic threat if this information is credible, but once again, a lot of people have been talking at the moment about this information that's come out today, which we do have to make it quite clear, folks, that it is fairly convenient in terms of timing, and also with the rhetoric that has been made prior, it seems to be trying to come up with a justification possibly for armed action against the Communist Cubans. And to break down a couple of the analytical points that we could go with here and kind of sparse out to see if this would make a lot of sense or not, here are our facts. The Cubans do not have a military to speak of, for the larger part. It exists on paper, but in terms of actual fighting force, there is absolutely none. If Cuba was to use one-way attack drones that they may have in their possession against the United States of America, that isn't really going to benefit them all that much of any sort, for that matter. If the drones are able to impact U.S. military facilities in the United States and cause some extent of damage, the Cubans would then not be able to survive the U.S. counterattack by any means that would be happening on their country as a result of those attacks. Meaning that would be akin to basically a self-death for the Cuban government to ever try and conduct an attack with these one-way drones on the United States, because it's not like they could ever follow that up with any sort of sustained military activity. Right now, Cuba is economically and materially destitute, having largely completely run out of oil, and the only oil that they have is from that one Russian tanker that the U.S. escorted to Havana recently, which has kept the national energy grid online, but they do not have a strategic oil reserve to even be able to continue hostile actions outside of the mule-drawn ox carts that they put gush guns on top of, which really won't be able to conduct anything offensively against the United States. We've also known that the President of the United States have started to make statements about the Communist Cubans largely out of the blue, and we had not heard any statements prior until today that there was any sort of an existent strategic threat that the communist Cubans faced against the United States of America to justify that sort of a stance. The only statement that had been made is that the Cubans are just not nice to the United States of America, and that would be the only reason for invading them. And there was never any statement that would give us an idea that U.S. intelligence had said prior that they were in the possession of one-way attack drones. So with those facts in the larger picture of things, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense for Cuba to use attack drones against the United States because they would get destroyed in the aftermath of that attempt. And additionally, we've never heard of a statement even getting close to this coming out of the U.S. government until some officials apparently leaked this information to Axios today, making it seem like they're trying to come up with a casus belli, which is Latin for a reason for war, with Cuba after the fact, after they've already gotten the ball rolling on trying to start a war with Cuba. Now they're possibly trying to find a way to justify the conflict to make it seem like there's a decent framework rather than it just being an offensive war against the Cubans for really no other purpose than the sake of it. So right now, a lot of people are talking about this at the moment in the chat and the information that came out about this possibility. And Matthew, what are people thinking about it? And what are you thinking about it as well?
Okay, so this has been the source of a lot of debate today. Some people believe the claims, and some people are vehemently opposed to the claim, and they don't believe it whatsoever. So the poll says, here's the question. It says, U.S. intel reports that Cuba has allegedly acquired 300 plus military attack drones to attack the coastal United States, which could mean Florida, it could mean Guantanamo Bay, where we have a military base, and also they allege that they could use those to attack U.S. Navy vessels in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's what they're saying. So what do you think in the audience? About 48%, this appears to be the most popular option, said it sounds fabricated. It sounds like a U.S. false flag to justify a war against Cuba. 25% said it sounds like Cuba is preparing a preemptive attack on the United States. And 19% said Cuba has them for defense only. So to address it, on my opinion, real quick, and then I'll get to the facts here, I would say this. 300 drones is not enough to cause a problem because while Cuba could technically fire and lob a couple at Florida, that would pretty much mean the end of the Cuban regime and probably the end of Cuba itself. That would be pretty much over with for Cuba at that point. And they know that. They're not stupid like that. They would know that would be their end. So I'm not sure what the thought behind that would be, because the thought behind Cuba attacking somebody would be to protect their country. But if their country gets destroyed because they attack Florida, I mean, what's the point in that? That wouldn't make much sense at all. The other side of the coin, though, I do believe the report that they have the drones because it makes sense. I mean, the drones don't cost a whole lot of money. And also, it sounds like Russia or China might have just simply given them to Cuba. So essentially, this is being made out to be the new Cuban Missile Crisis, but now it's the Cuban drone crisis. It's a different weapon, but the same concept. So I would say this. I think Cuba has the drones. They're probably for defense only. I really doubt they would launch a preemptive strike on the United States. That would be the most stupid thing I've ever seen any country do on the planet at that point. And I don't think they would do that. So I'm with the 19%. It is a national security threat, but is it a reason to invade Cuba? That might be a bit of a stretch, but you know, it's up to debate. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, folks, that I'm very much on the fence with this, and I think that we're going to have to get a lot more information out before I say clearly that it's some sort of a false flag or a fabrication or it's a legitimate attempt. But I would generally have to lean folks towards this is probably more of a fabrication than anything to make this sound like it's an existent threat, because generally, folks, here's something else that a lot of people aren't thinking. In the Middle East, it has been proven at this point that we really have no built-in drone-based defenses generally in the United States Armed Forces. And we've seen now that the satellite photography has been coming out of the Middle East that hundreds of facilities were hit by Iranian one-way attack drones over the course of just about a month of active fighting. And that's clearly showing us at the moment right now, the U.S. is woefully under-equipped for a drone war. So if the Cubans are preparing an attack, if we're being honest here, it'd probably be better to do nothing to them and let them attack us legitimately if they had those sorts of plans or designs, because if we start striking them in advance, they could try and retaliate by launching these drones into Florida and attacking cities like Miami, Tampa, and Orlando. or Jacksonville or whatnot, basically every single major city in Florida, and just try and blow away civilians in the dozens, and we really have no defense against that if they try that attack. If they try and attack first, they might go primarily for military targets, and then we'd be able to get everything airborne because we're going to see them coming in, obviously, and then they would start hitting air bases that have no active aircraft on the tarmac because all those aircraft have been sent airborne and scrambled already to be able to avoid getting hit on the ground. So that would be a far better outcome to let them launch the first shot in that sort of a scenario, then bombing them, and then possibly seeing a response where they start slaughtering U.S. civilians throughout all of southern Florida with drone attacks. That probably wouldn't be that great of an idea to give them that sort of a justification, considering that they might do that. I'd also have to say...
Also, by the way, it's like, I mean, we have, like, for example, we've been running nonstop surveillance flights around Cuba for over a month at least. They've been running drone surveillance down there from the U.S. Air Force. We, of course, have the aerostat, which is down there in the Keys. I believe that's where that vehicle is stationed. So we have surveillance. So presumably we could detect the drones coming toward Florida. And I mean, the drones aren't going at like hypersonic speed. I mean, they're going slow. So I would presume we'd have some time to respond to it. Like, if let's just say they lobbed like a few of them, it seems like we would have time to deploy fighter jets to shoot them down before they got to the coast. Because I mean, it's not a super long distance between Cuba and Florida, but it still takes some time to actually get there. So, we're not like completely defenseless against it. It's still a threat, but it's not like a nuke flying at Florida or something like that.
Also, I got to point out something here, folks, that I think kind of blows this whole theory or this leak away. So, if a drone, a Shahed flies at about 100 to 120 miles an hour. Miami's only about 120 miles away from Havana, Cuba. That means that if a drone was launched, or a couple of hundred of them were launched from Cuba to Miami, let's say at West Palm Beach, and particularly Mar-a-Lago, they'd be there in less than an hour, and they would be hitting that target in less than an hour. There's just not any defenses that we have built in that could defend against an influx of drones like that going towards a singular target. And we're saying that that threat is now existing and that the Cubans are planning attacks on Florida, yet the president flies down to Mar-a-Lago about every other day and hangs out there for about 4 days at a time, according to what we're hearing now, within an hour's distance of an attack from the communist Cubans with their drone forces. Does that sound like that makes sense? And if that kind of a threat existed, would the Secret Service even allow for the president to fly within an hour's range of an attack from the communist Cubans if this threat is that permeable and that ever present? That doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And also, I'm not saying the threat doesn't exist, by the way. Like, I don't want people to misunderstand us here. The threat may be real, but it's whether or not the threat really poses a big issue or not. That's the problem. Is it a minor threat or a severe threat? Like, where across the spectrum of threats does this threat fall? And if it was really that serious of a threat, it would seem like we'd go ahead and preemptively deploy air defenses down there in the Keys. So that way we could shoot these things down when they come in. If that was really that big of a threat, it would seem like that would be a logical move. But so far, we haven't really heard about that. They've done it very secretly, and I think people would see it. They'd also probably photograph it as well. So I don't really think they've put any down there. So I just don't know. Like, I feel like they have the drones. I think that story is accurate on that front, but to make it out to be like some existential threat, like it's the same equivalent of the Cuban Missile Crisis, that seems like a bit of a stretch.
I would have to agree. I'll be honest with y'all, folks. This, to be upfront, this seems like we're kind of grasping at straws, because also on top of that, folks, if we put ourselves in the Cuban government's shoes, how damn stupid would they have to be to launch a drone attack with 300 drones? That's just enough for one wave of an attack, mind you all. And then we're going to did we just hit the goal?
Whoa, oh my God.
Holy
Pat
moly!
Bomar just put in a $500 donation. I'm waiting for it to update. We are literally $40 away from the goal right now.
Oh my
Huge shout out
Lord!
to Pat Bomar, by the way. He's throwing a 500 in one go.
Dang, that is crazy right there. And a humongous shout out to Pat Bomar for that unbelievably huge donation to the fundraiser. That is unbelievably huge. And we are so close at this point, folks, to hitting that fundraiser goal. But getting us on back and into this analysis, none of it makes any sense. And on top of that, folks, if they launch a drone attack like that, nobody in the Cuban government that authorized that attack is going to live past the next week afterwards. And everybody has a survival mechanism built into them. Like there's no chance that the Cuban government and all of their officials are going, yes, I'm more than willing to sacrifice my life by getting a JDAM dropped on my forehead next week by launching a drone attack on the US that isn't really going to achieve much of anything in the long run. Nobody's going to make that decision in Cuba. That would be absolutely asinine. And we just hit the goal.
Hey, let's go. We just smashed that goal. Honestly, that's pretty quick. We hit that goal in literally less than an hour. That is very fantastic. A huge shout to the LSA, by the way. That is fantastic work right there.
Unbelievable work right there. That is absolutely crazy to see. We just hit the fundraiser goal, folks. And a humongous shout out to everybody who supported the fundraiser tonight, because each and every single one of y'all make these fundraisers possible and help us to be able to hit these fundraiser goals to help out folks that we're covering the news on around the entirety of the world, including Ukraine tonight. So a humongous shout out to all of y'all so much once again. I hope that has addressed that incredibly well. And getting us on out of the whole Cuban thing, just to wrap it up, folks, because I've been trying to wrap it up here and then a major donation came in and then we hit the fundraiser goal. I just think that the story is a little bit outlandish and is attempting to justify a eventual military campaign against Cuba, but I just don't really see this justification being a worthy one, necessary of starting a war with the Cubans. And I also believe that there's not really a lot of fangs to this threat at the moment, because there's a lot of things that aren't adding up that seem to be deconstructing this supposed existent threat that's now being posed to the United States by the Cubans.
Yeah, the U.S. has to realize, and this is not trying to be defeatist, but it's just simply addressing a problem at a time, because we're trying to bite off more than we can chew right here. I think what they're trying to do, I think why they're getting obsessed with Cuba, is they think that Cuba would be a quick victory, and they're trying to basically they're playing a numbers game is basically what they're doing right now. The Iran thing's not going well, so if they can go quickly take Cuba, then they can say, oh look, we had success in Cuba, but of course there's a little snag in Iran, so we're going to finish that one up later. It's like, well, we're not trying to get into like a pissing contest, for lack of better words, about who can take over countries the fastest, or, do we have enough wins versus losses. We need to address one problem at a time, and the Strait of Hormuz and the entire Iran situation is right now a massive loose end. It's a loose end that needs to be tied up quickly, and we don't need to be moving on to something else just to claim a victory. We need to finish what we started, and then if there's a legitimate reason to go after Cuba, then think about it after the war is finished, but not before then.
I would agree. We also have one last piece coming out of Cuba where we were able to hear that shipping giants CMA, CGM, and Hapag-Lloyd have all suspended their bookings to and from Cuba until further notice. These companies did run intermittent cargo shipping to Cuba from time to time. There isn't a huge volume of cargo traffic, mind you, all that goes into Cuba. Their largest port is Havana. And if we look at Havana, this is their port. And I think you can all get the clear idea from how sad and decrepit this port looks that the amount of shipping traffic that went to Cuba is wildly small. I feel like a place like Gulfport, Mississippi probably has a higher shipping volume than the entirety of communist Cuba, just from the condition and state of this port at the moment. So there you have that. Not really that big of news, but it does appear that some major shipping companies are canceling their voyages or cargo shipments to Cuba during the foreseeable future. So with that in mind, folks, it is time for us to move out of the two largest pieces of news from the night, and it's now time for us to move on into the other major pieces of news that we have throughout the rest of the world, including from the Middle East, East Asia, the United States of America, and also from Ukraine as well, because we still have a lot of news to cover from the war in Ukraine over the course of this day. But I do have to say a humongous thanks to everybody for hitting that fundraiser goal in less than an hour. That is absolutely crazy. And I gotta say, folks, that it's an unbelievable thing to see the generosity and the kindness of folks continuing to support these fundraisers well on into about 4.5 years of coverage here on this channel. It's an absolute honor and a great pleasure that we get to cover the news to each and every single one of y'all every single night. And it's also crazy to know that every single Sunday we can all come together as the Lee Spring Army and raise unbelievable amounts for these fundraisers to help out people that we are actually covering in the news every single night. Y'all have helped out amazingly with things like the war in Ukraine through Razom, and also Nova Ukraine and many other amazing nonprofits that we've fundraised for over the years. Y'all have also helped out massively with the U.S. Armed Forces in the Middle East, supporting the USO, the Wounded Warriors projects, and many other nonprofits. Y'all even have helped out with things like the LA wildfire, helping to fundraise for the Los Angeles Fire Department when we were covering that insane news when that was unfolding just a little while ago. And y'all have continued to show that the Lee Spring Army is has one of the biggest hearts of any community out there on the internet. And I got to say that it's an amazing honor to know that we get to tell the news to such amazing folks like all of y'all. And so, for a brief moment, Matthew, let's look into those top donors of the fundraiser. I wish we could call all of y'all off, even if y'all threw in $1, because each and every one of y'all made this fundraiser possible. But sadly, folks, usually so many people throw in support to the fundraiser, we can only call out donations that were above $50 to try and make the list a little bit more brief. But Matthew, who are those top donors of the night so far?
All right, so far, the top donors so far have been Pat Bomar, who put in that $500, the largest one of the night, by the way. Huge shout out to Pat for that extremely generous donation to the fundraiser. Also, a big shout out to Old Warrior Fellow, who threw in a $411 donation as well. Also, crazy support to the fundraiser. A big shout out as well to Trison34, who put in a $100, along as Cerebrus3 as well, who also put in a $100, along with Waba, who put in a $50, and then Mike Uint put in a $50 as well, along with Greg Carrier, and also Bobo Vasquez, Samuel Sazamansky, and E.W. Fisher each put in a $50 as well. And once again, like the Enforcer said, a huge shout out to everybody that threw in any amount of support to the fundraiser tonight. All that support adds up, by the way. Without the small ones, the large ones, etc., we would not be on just under $3,000 raised right now, which is fantastic, by the way. In just about an hour's time, we've smashed the goal and well above it. So once again, the LSA has come through, and we are very appreciative. And I know Ukraine's appreciative as well. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say a humongous thanks to every single one of y'all once again. It is unbelievably impressive and amazing to see that y'all continue to support these fundraisers like this. And I wish we could call each and every single one of y'all out, because every single one of y'all is doing your part in making a mark in the world by supporting these nonprofits. We support these nonprofits through YouTube Give. So whenever we make these fundraisers, YouTube makes a little account that all of the money goes into that they handle, and then they hand it over to the nonprofit. So we never get to directly see exactly where the support directly went and who was directly affected, but it is helping out quite significantly. All these nonprofits that we support around the world are doing amazing work, and if you want to see the kind of work that they do, just go and pull up their website, like for example Razom For Ukraine, and take a look at their recent projects and who they've been able to help out and what they've been doing. It's amazing things that they're doing, helping to save people's lives, moving families from war-torn areas, and keeping a roof over their head and their basic necessities of food, water, and shelter in the meantime, helping people to remember the Ukrainians and keep their struggle in mind around the world. It's amazing and incredible stuff like that y'all are supporting through this nonprofit. And I got to thank you all so much once again for supporting this fundraiser, because not only are we able to cover the news here on this channel, we're able to have a little bit of an impact out there, a little bit of a silver lining to all of the brutal wars that we cover, and we're able to make just the situation slightly better in some way for some of those people out there, and that makes it all worthwhile in the end. So a humongous thanks to all of y'all once again for supporting the fundraiser so far tonight, and if y'all would like to continue to support it, although it has passed the fundraiser goal, you still can. There is absolutely no limit to how far this fundraiser can go. But in the meantime, let's take 3 questions from the chat, Matthew, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news that we have for the night.
All right, and also, by the way, a quick note, if you threw in a super chat, we'll address those during the final question segment of the night, so we can kind of rabbit hole in those a little bit. But in the meantime, though, to go ahead and see what the live chat's been saying in the questions, our first one here of the 3 is going to go to Outcast Jeff. He said, what do y'all really think about the possibility of Putin actually using nukes on Ukraine?
I would say that the possibility is still somewhat low. There just isn't really a historical justification for a use of a nuclear weapon in this type of situation. And while the attack on Moscow is definitely making the Russians look woefully weak and massively incompetent in their own defense, I would say that this isn't the most damaging thing that's been done to the Russians in their national history, at least modern national history during this war. The most damaging thing that's been done to them so far, and I'm very certain on this one, is the attacks during Operation Spiderweb. The Operation Spiderweb attack knocked out 1 in every 3 strategic bombers in the whole of the Russian Federation. And the Russian Federation currently does not have a capability to produce those bombers of that size in the modern day, meaning that those are indefinite, permanent losses and attrition that the Russian Air Forces face because of this war. And strategic bombers are incredibly important for their nuclear standoff capabilities and also their conventional standoff capabilities as well, as the Tu-95 and the Tu-160 can carry nuclear-armed cruise missiles on outer wing pylons. And so the destruction of those aircraft were directly destroying a third of their airborne fixed-wing nuclear deterrent forces that they could use to defend themselves against a possible nuclear attack from any other nuclear adversary. And even with the kind of damage that we saw in that attack, the Russian response was fairly mild compared to what people thought was going to happen. They only launched, I believe, a larger drone and missile attack against the Ukrainians in the weeks to follow, and that was it, because that's really all that they can do. They've maxed out all of their conventional responses, and so any response at this point either just has to be a larger conventional attack, which doesn't really ramp up the heat any further than it is right now, or they have to move towards using a nuclear weapon. But the problem with using a nuclear weapon is that the Russians know this, and we also know this here in the West. That is opening up Pandora's box in a way that they might not be that happy about opening, because once it's open, it can't be closed. If they start laying out the precedent that you can use a tactical nuclear weapon on a non-nuclear country just because the war isn't really going that well for you, they could start seeing that a lot of their allies start toppling like dominoes. Like, for example, with Iran, if Iran's giving us a tough time, the Russians just gave us a justification day and night to just drop a nuke on Tehran and have the whole thing done and over with in a couple of days. Or we could see that, for example, there could be significant and prolific nuclear escalation in Europe, as the French and the British could start forward deploying their nuclear weapons right onto Russia's borders to give the quickest response time possible. The US might do the same, and the Russians would generally probably want to avoid a situation like that, because then they're going to be cornered strategically in nuclear arms far worse than they already are right now. So I would say that even with the desperate and horrific situation the Russians are in at the moment, and of course with a lot of people, including ourselves, generally getting the idea that they're probably starting to consider a possibility of a nuclear weapon more now than ever, I would still say that that percentage chance is somewhat small, less than 5% in my opinion. But Matthew, what do you think?
Honestly, Putin using nukes, it's a more of a possibility than some people really lend credibility to. Like, it's not out of the question. I think that's something that people need to understand as well. So Ukraine has to take that into consideration when they're attacking Moscow like this. But here's the catch, though. Ukraine is taking that into consideration, and they're not striking the Kremlin, and they're not striking any crucial decision-making centers. So I think in Ukraine's mind, they think that that will not cause a nuclear strike by not hitting those facilities. So that's a safe way to go. But, you know, at the same time, though, Putin is starting to have a very bad credibility crisis inside of Russia. And we've kind of covered it before. That's why Putin's cracking down on the internet services. He's cracking down on Telegram. He's having a crisis because he fears that maybe there might be some like Wagner type uprising that happens again with the people inside of Moscow. So, you know, we can't underestimate Putin's mental state. He might be at such a desperate point that he starts thinking about doing something stupid because he thinks that the end is near for his regime. So at the same time, though, the war has to be brought to an end. And if it takes, you know, possibly putting pressure on Moscow to bring it to an end, I mean, that's up to Ukraine. I mean, at this point, the war is dragging on 4+ years. So they're trying everything they can to bring it to an end. And they believe that putting pressure on Moscow will do it. So, you know, there's always a possibility of nukes. I think they're riding the line carefully enough.
I would generally agree with that. So I hope that answers the question well from both of us as to whether there is a significant threat of the Russians using nukes. I think we're both generally of the idea that the chance is there, but it's not wildly high to where that's an existent threat every day of the war. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to none other than Tom Exman. And he said, here's a good question, Matt. Did the Russian oil sanctions lift? Did it end now? And yes, the U.S. had given a temporary sanctions relief to Russia. We still don't really know why they did that. It made no sense, and we were very much opposed to it, and pretty much everybody was opposed to it, but the U.S. did it anyway. But now it's behind us, thankfully. The U.S. did not renew that sanctions waiver, and now the oil sanctions are 100% back on Russia again, which is the way it should have been the entire time. So thankfully it's back to it. Hopefully we won't see that waiver issued again. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say yes. It's not hopefully not going to be put in place again. It was absolutely ridiculous and stupid. Like you hate to say it, folks, but the part of the endless list of absolutely bad foreign policy decisions that have been made in a rotational cycle these days. But that one was absolutely horrendous. Literally nobody in the G7 understood it, and everybody in the G7 openly opposed it, except for the United States, which was the one pushing it forward. A lot of people in the United States opposed it. A lot of people in the Congress did from both parties, and also a lot of people here in the U.S. public, including ourselves, heavily opposed it because it's helping an enemy to be able to financially enrich itself, which is the number one way that the Russians will be able to extend this war to happen even longer. And so if the current administration is actually dedicated to the idea that the war in Ukraine has to end faster than later, then making sure that the Russians are not making any money to be able to financially prolong the war is definitely within the interest of that goal. Yet that action is showing that it's totally fine for Russia to financially enrich itself to some extent and to be able to continue the war due to it being in a financially slightly less bad position than it was prior. And so I would say it hopefully won't be coming back around again. The sanctions have been smacked back on in full because the waivers have now expired. And so hopefully we'll be seeing that such mistake is not repeated again because it's well outside of American interests, it's well outside of Western interests to see that the Russians are financially enriching themselves in the current conditions. So I hope that has addressed it the best I can. And with that, we are on to the last question of the segment, and then we're going to be getting on into the rest of the news for the night.
And this last one here, before we get back to the breaking news, this one goes to I'm D. Stevenson. And he said, could that lightning that we saw in Moscow, could that catch the oil clouds on fire? And that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I haven't really thought about that. So I guess the two questions we need to answer here: how hot is lightning, and what is the flashpoint of crude oil? I guess vapors, because at that point it's a vapor.
So let's see here. Dang, dude, I didn't know this, but let me go look at this a little bit more. Oh wow, so lightning strikes can actually trigger fires or explosions with any amount of oil, leading to damage, injury, and everything else, according to EngineerLive.com. So it does appear that there's a great deal of sources saying that lightning can ignite vapors from oil and oil itself that's in the air.
So I guess but it would have to be a good enough concentration of it, I guess. So you couldn't just be like a very small amount. So I don't think there was that big of a concentration near the lightning strikes to catch it on fire. But I guess technically, hypothetically, if it was close enough, I guess it could set it on fire. I wonder what that would cause, because it's kind of like it's kind of like at 10,000 feet or something. I wonder what that would cause.
Oh my God, dude, lightning can heat air that it passes through to 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun.
Yeah, I didn't. I generally knew it was extremely hot. I just didn't know the exact temperature like it was.
I actually didn't know that it was that hot. I thought it was really hot, but I never realized that it was 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun kind of hot. That's actually kind of crazy. That really makes me wonder how in the world those people survive lightning strikes. That's very interesting.
Don't.
Well, a lot of them don't, but some of them have. Like that one park ranger guy or the forest ranger guy. Didn't you hear about him? Like he got struck by lightning so many times in his life that people would avoid him because they were scared if they were near him, they'd also get struck by lightning.
Yeah, I think you might be coated like a salmon if you get hit by that. So I'm not really sure if that's a good thing.
Man, that's honestly insane. 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. And I don't think they actually know. I think there's some theories out there about how lightning actually forms, but I don't think science actually has a perfectly clear law as to why lightning forms. It's kind of an interesting, if I'm right on that, it's a really interesting thing about it. But beyond that, it certainly could, but like Matthew's saying, it'd have to be a significant enough concentration. But that is crazy, though. Hypothetically, it certainly could catch oil vapors or aerosoled oil that's up there in the sky on fire if it's in a significant enough concentration. Maybe that's why the thunderstorm looked more violent than normal over Moscow for their area, is because the oil may have been in the clouds and helping to at least make it a more spectacular looking sort of a thunderstorm overhead. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe so, possibly.
That's just wildly interesting, though. And I gotta say, that is one hell of a question I'm D. Stevenson to round this thing out on, because apparently the answer is yes, it could. We just don't know how easy that would really be able to do in practice, but definitely possible. So I hope that does address that the best we can. And with that, folks, it is time for us to move on into the rest of the news that we have from around the world. Now, before we move on out of the whole Cuban thing, I'm just going to go ahead and hit our news in Washington here early so that way we can just get it out of the way. Apparently, there is going to be a Situation Room meeting that's going to be held with the top national security team on Tuesday to discuss the options for military action against Iran, according to Axios. That also came out around the same time that the Cuban story came out. So, moving us on out of all of that news in the United States, it's now time for us to segue directly on into the Middle East, speaking of that upcoming national security meeting that's going to be held in the Situation Room on Tuesday. Inside of the Middle East, we've been able to see some interesting developments over the D. According to the United Arab Emirates, they have been attacked over the course of the day by a significant amount of drone forces. And this is some of the reports that we were able to hear within the course of the day. The Ministry of Defense announced that on the 17th of May, 2026, UAE air defense systems intercepted 3 UAVs that entered the country from the western border direction. The ministry said that 2 of the drones were successfully intercepted, while the third struck an electrical generator outside the inner perimeter of the Barakah nuclear power plant in the Al Dhafar region. The ministry added that investigations are underway to determine the source of the attacks, noting that further details will be announced upon completion of the investigations. The Ministry of Defense affirmed that it remains fully prepared and ready to address any threats and will firmly confront any attempts to undermine the country's security in a manner that safeguards its sovereignty, security, and stability and protects its national interests and gains. In particular, according to the report that was given right there by the United Arab Emirates, it does appear that the Al Barakah nuclear power plant was attacked today by one of these drones. Here is an actual picture of the Al Barakah. For some reason I want to say the Barak nuclear power plant, but the Al Barakah nuclear power plant within the Al Dhafar region of the UAE. From what we understand, the facility consists of 4 APR 1400 nuclear reactors with a combined capacity of 5,600 megawatts, supplying up to 25% of the country's electrical demands on any given day. From what we understand, one of the drones landed and exploded on an electrical power generator in the near the inner perimeter of the nuclear power plant, which we might be able to assume is one of the backup generators that would be used in the event of the nuclear power plant being disconnected from the grid in some sort of a in-world scenario, if we want to call it that, where the emergency generator would be able to kick in and keep coolant pumping through the water pumps into the reactor to make sure that they don't start running away and then going into a meltdown. This is a very significant sort of an incident here, and it is also quite clear that this is most likely from the IRGC. There's quite literally no one else who's conducting drone attacks in the whole of the Middle East except for groups aligned with Iran or Iran itself, so it definitely came from Iran in one way or another. And this was getting very close to possibly being a nuclear disaster over the course of the day. So a lot of people are currently talking about this at the moment, but I'm going to give you all a little bit of an extra minute to get in y'all's opinions on the poll and go through a little bit of news, additional news that we have on this situation. According to a UAE news outlet, which unfortunately I cannot speak Arabic that well or read Arabic well enough to know exactly what that says, but authorities in Abu Dhabi responded to a fire incident that broke out in an electrical generator outside the inner perimeter of the Barakah nuclear power plant in the Al Dhafar region caused by a drone or strike. No injuries were reported, and there was no impact of radiological safety levels. All precautionary measures have been taken, and further updates will be provided as they become available. The Federal Authority for Nuclear Regulation, FANR, confirmed that the fire did not affect the safety of the power plant or the readiness of its essential systems, and that all units are operating as normal. The public is reminded to obtain information from official sources only, and to avoid spreading rumors or unverified information. I do have to say, for it to be an emirate, that's kind of interesting interesting that their internal body for nuclear regulation is called the Federal Authority. That doesn't really seem to be falling under an emirate framework. But what do I know? Apparently they have some sort of a federal office within the UAE, which is an emirate of kingdoms, but or a united group of emirates, but nevertheless, outside of that clerical issue there, it does appear that we're getting information that this was a direct attack within the area of the nuclear power plant. And now, getting us back around to the poll, considering that it's had a little bit of a moment to get some votes, a lot of people currently are talking about what should be done about the attack on the Al Baraka nuclear power plant within the UAE. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so thankfully this attack on this nuclear power plant inside the United Arab Emirates thankfully did not hit the actual reactor building itself, although I will say this, the drone likely did not have enough explosive power behind it to even put a dent in the reactor dome itself, so that's the good news. But the bad news is this, it hit one of the backup generators from the sounds of it. So the risk to a nuclear power plant when it comes to a war zone type scenario like this is that these drones could end up hitting the cooling system and also the generators that power it, and if these plants get disconnected from the power grid, then you could be looking at a possible meltdown over a week or so. So it can be very dangerous to say the least. So that's why people are taking this quite seriously. But what should be done over it? That's the question. 71% said Iran should be hit harder than ever to teach them a lesson. 13% said the Iran proxies should be hit hard, and 4% said nothing should happen. It was probably just an accident. And the only thing that really matters is this. If it accidentally fell on the facility, that's irrelevant. Iran shouldn't be firing drones at other countries. That's the bottom line right there. That's all that really matters. The fact it hit a nuclear power plant, that makes it worse, but that doesn't change the equation that it's an attack. So right now, here's the question mark that I have. These drones allegedly came from the western border of the UAE, which is the opposite side from Iran. It did not come across the Persian Gulf. It came from the western end of their border, which seems to suggest it could have been possibly an Iranian proxy group that ended up launching these drones into the UAE. That's possible as well. Or it could have been maybe they came in from a different attack vector and they came directly from Iranian territory. That's another possibility. So I say this, whoever did it, it's Iran. At the end of the day, that's who did it. So it's apparently not good enough for Iran that the U.S. is holding off their attacks, and right now they're still adhering to a ceasefire that we shouldn't be adhering to. That's not good enough for Iran. They want to start attacking nuclear power plants now, which tells us everything we need to know about the war needing to restart. Better start it now before it's too late, basically. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would agree, and we should be hitting Iran harder than ever, like the 72% is saying, and we should be seeing that our efforts are focused on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, first and foremost, to remove any sort of power that the Iranians have over us in the current war, and to completely remove the situation from their hands and directly into ours about how this unfolds from here. And that would be best done by reopening the Strait of Hormuz at this point. But moving us on out of that poll, we've also been able to hear over the course of the day that the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Defense also announced the following as well. The official spokesperson for the Ministry of Defense, Major General Turki al-Maliki, stated that on the morning of Sunday, corresponding to the 17th of May 2026 AD, 3 drones were intercepted and destroyed after entering the kingdom's airspace coming from Iraqi airspace. Major General Ali Maliki affirmed that the Ministry of Defense reserves the right to respond at the appropriate time and place and will take and implement all necessary operational measures to respond to any attempts to infringe on the kingdom's sovereignty, security, and the safety of its citizens and residents on its territory. This was a statement by the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Defense over the course of the day, and also confirming that once again, Iranian proxy forces are conducting attacks ongoing at this moment against Saudi Arabia. In the midst of this, we've also been able to hear that the United States is now saying that they think that the Iranians should be afraid of what's going on right now, according to the President of the United States. Meanwhile, the Iranians are ensuring that traffic is still remaining at quite literal non-existent levels over the course of the day, compared to what was the pre-war norm of about 140 passings to 120 passings per day on average. And we've also been able to hear that they are now threatening invasion against the UAE and Bahrain. Iranian officials say Tehran is prepared to seize the coastlines of the UAE and Bahrain if the United Arab Emirates attempts to seize Iranian-controlled islands in the Persian Gulf. This is a direct Iranian counter-statement to the rumors and reports that came out yesterday that we also covered on air, that the United States had approached the UAE and asked them if they were willing to try and invade some sort of an island and hold it somewhere within the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which we covered yesterday, and we knew already that the UAE wouldn't be able to pull that off. But now the Iranians are threatening to conduct amphibious landings on the UAE and Bahrain. Now, I'm not even going to give y'all the stats on what they have left militarily. I can just tell y'all, just knowing them off the top of my head, literally impossible. They have no way to land these troops. They have no naval capabilities to speak of outside their fast attack boats, which are only usable in the Strait of Hormuz, and you can't support a full amphibious landing in a foreign nation over 100 miles away or 50 miles away by sea with a whole bunch of pontoon boats and speedboats. That's just not possible. You know, I know that a lot of people have a lot of respect for the Cajun Navy, and I do myself, but have you ever told the Cajun Navy to go and, invade Dubai? That's going to be a little bit out of their capabilities, and right now the Iranians, in terms of naval capabilities, are about as well off as the Cajun Navy, which is a humanitarian nonprofit here in the States. So, clearly y'all can get the idea. That ain't going to be happening anytime soon. But the Iranians are absolutely wilding out, and they're still making statements that are showing us at the moment they're sure as hell not wanting peace. I mean, obviously, they're wanting war. I mean, I think that at this point, we ought to be giving them what they want. We ought to be giving them war and plenty of it. And we ought to be showing them who in the world runs the Strait of Hormuz, which sure as hell isn't them. We also got to hear that there was some air defense fire within Avaj today, but really no other news came out rather than the fact that the Iranians, tweaked out a little, fired some air defense guns, and it didn't really appear that anything was going on outside of that. And we've also been able to hear that in the midst of this all, the Russians are trying to be really cute. Apparently they've sent the sanctioned Russian tanker, the Pegasus, in and out of the U.S. blockade several times over the past few days, just to waste the U.S.'s time. No joke.
Well, that's crazy, isn't it? Also, by the way, if it's a sanctioned vessel, I thought the U.S. was supposed to be stopping sanctioned vessels because it says here in the post, or at least it alleges in the post, that the vessel is likely sanctioned. Excuse me. So it's like, why are they letting this through over and over and over? It's like, wouldn't we, stop and inspect or board it or something?
Yeah, I would feel like that would be the case. I would say this, folks. At this point, we ought to just seize the Pegasus on mere principle. If it's wasting our time by going through the blockade multiple times and forcing us to divert destroyers to it and telling them to turn around, we ought to just seize the damn thing and teach them a lesson. Because they think they're going to keep messing with the U.S. Navy this way. They've got another thing coming. The U.S. isn't around to play games. If they're clearly trying to abuse and waste the resources of the U.S. blockade, then they should be seized for being a liable threat or a potential danger to the ongoing U.S. operations within the blockade line. That'd be my 2 cents, but, apparently, folks, we currently have this thing called giving the Russians a lot of deference on damn near everything, so we never really do anything that we should be doing to the Russians in reality, and we let stupid shenanigans like these go on far longer than they need to, just because it's Russia. If it was China, we would seize this thing overnight. If it was Iran, we'd seize this thing overnight. If it was literally anybody else in the world, we'd seize the thing within hours. But with the Russians, though, we'll let this thing go through the blockade about 3 or 4 times, and we'll just keep playing the game with it, because for some reason, the Russians are special people. But moving us on out of that, we've also been able to hear that down in Yemen, there's been a very interesting incident. It appears that an MQ-9 Reaper was shot down within the desert. This video here showed some burning remains and debris of some sort of a craft that had been shot down, and upon further examination, it does appear that there was a drop tank that fell into the desert near the debris field, along with a couple of other pieces of this drone, including this one here, which appears to be a dual set of AGM-114 Hellfires, possibly, which were most likely mounted onto the wing pylon of an MQ-9 reconnaissance drone. So it does look like there may have been a confirmed loss of an MQ-9 Reaper of the U.S. Air Force over the Houthi lands in western Yemen today. But we're still trying to get more information on that, and so far CENTCOM hasn't put out an announcement or a statement confirming the loss of the MQ-9 Reaper. But it does look like, by all indications, it most likely was an MQ-9 Reaper. Moving us on out of that information, we've also been able to see that within Iraq, it now appears that the story has grown on the Israeli basis, and according to the New York Times, Israel operated at least 2 secret military outposts in Iraq's western desert for over a year. This was apparently planned as far back as late 2024 to support logistical operations against Iran. The United States was aware of at least one Israeli base since June of 2025, but withheld the information from the Iraqis. Furthermore, the U.S. actively compelled Iraq to shut down its radar systems under the guise of protecting American aircraft, a move that effectively blinded the Iraqis and prevented them from detecting the hostile Israeli presence on their own soil. Even without radar, the Iraqi military's regional command had suspected an Israeli presence. Commanders had been conducting long-range surveillance on the sites, but when they pressed the U.S. counterparts for information, their requests were apparently met with silence, at least according to a report that came out from the New York Times today. I gotta say, I know that we all don't have a lot of positive feelings about the Iraqis because their government is still heavily kind of, at the hip with some terrorist groups in the region. But we have to be very careful about doing this kind of stuff, because even with the Iraqis being a fairly questionable government and most of their nation is basically run like the Wild West, we do have to remember that these sorts of things could lead other countries to be very weary or suspicious of us in the region. Like, for example, what if the Saudi Arabians started to get the idea in their head that the U.S. might just, lie to them to allow for the Israelis to set up an air base in their country without Saudi Arabia's permission, and then operate that indefinitely without any sovereign approval from the Saudis? That would go poorly. That could piss the Saudis off greatly, and this might get them concerned that something like that could happen in the future, and that the U.S. might allow for the Israelis to blatantly violate their sovereignty, which as a nation, they have a right to protect their own sovereignty and to ensure it, and to also grant or deny permission for other countries to use their land and territory or airspace for any reasons or any purposes. So I would have to say, in my honest opinion, folks, these sorts of things shouldn't really be applauded or supported regardless, because it might be giving a lot of our allies the idea that the U.S. is just willing to let Israel do whatever the hell they want in the region, which could start to hurt our relations with all of the other Middle Eastern countries that we're allied with, like the Gulf states. So, moving us on from that, we also were able to hear of some significant air activity that was also reported within the area of northern Iraq as well, near the Nineveh government today. Nothing more came out about that. It was just a report of more Air Force activity in that area, which has started to become a fairly decent norm. Moving us on from that, we've also been able to hear that within the Baalbek Valley, the Israelis were continuing to conduct airstrikes. I gotta say, folks, this 45-day extension of the ceasefire is already going so well. The Israelis are already bombing Lebanese territory at the moment.
Man, I love these ceasefires, these modern day ceasefires. Honestly, these ceasefires are completely meaningless, by the way. So when the U.S. goes out of their way to make a big point that, oh, look, we were able to secure a 45-day ceasefire, it's like, well, if nobody's going to adhere to it, it's literally pointless. I guess they're assuming that maybe people won't pay attention to it, possibly. But I mean, we're paying attention to it. There's strikes all over the place.
It's like, damn, it's like the ceasefire is basically useless, and we keep extending it, and nobody's following it at all, because, before you know it, here in a couple of hours, we'll start hearing that Hezbollah's fired another barrage at Israel, so what was the point of the thing? We also were able to hear that the Israeli Air Force was active over Daraa, Syria, near the As-Sawaida government in southern Syria over the day, and we also got initial reports that HC-130Js, most likely operated by the CIA, were operating within the area of CENTCOM's AOR over the day, and it looks like two of them were Regal 80 and also King 91. So we did get that information over the course of the day as well.
They relocated to Jordan, it says here in the post.
It looks like they did. They both went to Muwafaq Salty, from what we hear.
Aha. So it looks to me like they're getting out of the possible firing range of the Iranians, or at least, being closer to the firing range, because I guess Jordan would still be in it, but they're getting away from the coastline of the Persian Gulf.
Man, they are getting away from that coastline there. I just wonder why. And I wonder why they're flying so many CIA aircraft to Jordan, of all places. Surely they're not going there to go take a look at the Wadi Rum. I mean, it's like, they got something going on. Maybe they're just moving the assets out of the way, and whoever the agents are on the ground, they're just left behind. Or maybe they loaded them all up and they're all going on vacation to Jordan. Who knows? But a fairly interesting development, to say the least. Also, it's not like Muwafaq Salty's outside of Iranian targeting range. We have seen in the past it's well within range. I mean, they've been firing stuff all the way into Incirlik, Turkey. So, it's like, that certainly isn't out of range. So it's a little interesting that they did move them there. We also were able to hear that, according to some news that came out of Israel today as well, the President Netanyahu spoke for 30 minutes by phone, and right afterwards, Netanyahu immediately entered a limited security cabinet meeting after the call. White House reporters have also been called to an unknown event on the South Lawn earlier today. So it looks like the Israelis and the United States might be scheming, but to what extent, and what are they planning? Well, obviously war.
They gave me a call on the cell phone. Man, you got to leave the golf course for this one. That's serious, folks. When the president leaves the golf course to take a phone call, something's happening.
Yes, Netanyahu, we're already working on bombing Iran again. We're trying our best. Believe me. Like, you gotta believe me. But beyond that, I gotta say that it is something else right there. And also, Also, I got to say, I asked someone in the chat because they said I had an L take, so I asked them why. And then they said a false equivalence fallacy. Well, you have to explain. Like I'm legitimately,
Right, I'll
sincerely.
give him attention, bro. You're giving him attention.
But
Don't
I'm
do it.
legitimately asking. Like I'm legitimately asking on this one. You have
Who cares?
Well, I care. Like that's
Leave
why
him
I'm
be.
addressing.
It's just a random. It's just a random bot, bro. Let him go.
Well, I'm like it's a free country here, and I'm asking like legitimately because this person's been in the chat for a little bit, so I'm trying to ask them what their issue is with that statement, and so I would like for them to clarify exactly what the issue is, instead of just saying word salad, false equivalency and whatnot. So I would like a legitimate answer. But moving us on from that. And on out of the Middle East, we have also been able to hear today in Beijing that there has been, according to some reports that came out today from Axios, which Axios has apparently been on fire today, that some close advisors of the president fear the most significant outcome of the recent China summit could be an increased risk of the Chinese president moving to invade Taiwan within the next 5 years. So it does appear that at least at the moment, Axios is now saying that due to the prior meeting with the president of the United States, there could be an increased risk of a possible conflict with Taiwan because of the position that the U.S. took, which might be giving us an idea why they're now trying to go through the route of appeasement of increasing trade deals and cooperation with the Chinese, hoping that that will stave them off. So I would have to say that that's a fairly interesting one right there, and that might also be giving us an idea that this actually went quite badly behind the scenes if we're starting to get reports like that from Axios, which once again, I do want to make it clear, folks, take that with a grain of salt at the moment because it's anonymous officials coming out from Axios, and Axios has been putting out some very interesting stories over the course of the day on multiple different ends, so we don't know how accurate these are, but it does appear that at the moment, it seems that there is an indication there could be a increased chance of conflict over a quicker amount of time with Taiwan than there was prior, which is once again leading us.
Like it. It seems logical, like it could be, because if you leave the meeting with Beijing and with the Xi Jinping in China, and then you start saying things like we're not really wanting to go too far to fight a war and stuff like that. I mean, that's clearly signaling that the U.S. isn't fully committed to Taiwan. Also, Taiwan came out today and they were like, "Hey, look, we're not needing to declare independence. We're already independent. There's no need for all that." So it's like Taiwan didn't even know what is being said right now. So. Taiwan seems like they're worried, but ultimately, though, whether or not China's going to invade tomorrow, I think, what did they say, 5 years or something?
It was something like that. But I mean, generally in the last administration, the reports were coming out that the invasion window would start probably in 2027 at this rate.
Yeah, honestly, we got to be careful with that, though. I covered this in a short video earlier today. We cannot let China think they can invade Taiwan, especially with TSMC not being fully offshored yet into the United States. We absolutely cannot give the impression that it's okay for China to invade Taiwan. The U.S. needs to reverse that immediately. I even saw senators and congressmen saying that, like on both sides. They were like, they need to reverse that immediately. That's an awful message to put out there, and it makes zero sense at all. We might be able to play games with NATO, even though I don't support that. We can get away with that without causing too much damage. But if we do something like with Taiwan and start putting that message forward that they can invade, that would be, I don't know, 3 or 4 times worse than the NATO situation.
I would definitely agree. But moving us on out of East Asia, we are going to be moving on over back into Europe to cover some of the developments that we've also been able to hear out of Europe over the course of the day. Generally, European news itself from Western Europe is generally quiet for the course of the day, but we did get to hear that within the area of Lithuania, a drone had been found, apparently a Ukrainian one, within Lithuania, and the National Crisis Management Center is now trying to secure the site and retrieve the remains of the drone that has apparently crashed inside of Lithuania. From what we've been seeing recently, and we've also been able to clear out the Resigne situation, it appears that the Resigne situation may have been Ukrainian drones that had been messed with through electronic warfare measures by the Russians and somehow flew errant over the border and into Latvia and then crashed within that area, which is kind of what the Latvians are starting to work off of these days. This might be a similar sort of an instance to where a Ukrainian drone lost connection and then just flew practically on autopilot into Lithuania Lithuania and then crashed inside of Lithuania, because these are starting to become somewhat regular occurrences for drones to just float across the border from Russia or Belarus into Baltic states, and it seems like a decent number of them are Ukrainian, while the other half are Russian. So it appears that at this point it's just basically anybody's guess as to whose drones are landing inside these Baltic states, because sometimes they're Ukrainian and other times they end up being Russian. So moving us on out of all of that news out of the Baltic states, it is also time for us to move on down and into the other strikes the Ukraine has conducted over the course of the day in places that were not Moscow. Moving us on down and into the Belgrade area, we have been able to hear of attacks that were conducted on Belgrade as of late. We didn't really get a lot of footage of what they directly hit, but we did get the air defense fire happening in the area.
Ебать, да ну нахуй. Беспилотник вот сбили.
Oh dear.
Moving us on from that and into our next clip.
Oh look, a shooting star, make a wish.
Look at that. And then we got
Look,
a couple.
I can see this guy holding an iPhone right here. They man, I'll tell you, they hate America so bad, but they have to have our stuff.
Man, they hate us because they ain't us. That's just how it goes. That's just how it goes in this area. We also did get to hear of the ongoing drone attacks within this area, so we're assuming there will probably be a decent amount of information on these drone attacks and what kind of damage they caused by tomorrow, but it certainly is showing us that at least at the moment there are some significant drone attacks that are being conducted by the armed forces of Ukraine. We have also been able to see some additional news within the Stavropol area confirming the target that was hit last night, which was the Nezhnomysk Azot plant, which is a chemical plant in southern Stavropol Krai, following a drone strike yesterday on the 16th of May. Ukraine also attacked the Moscow region overnight from the 16th to 17th of May as well, which I don't think we need any introduction or additional elaboration on that one, because we've already covered that one extensively. Moving us on out of that bit of news, we've also been able to hear that near to the coastline, pictures have started to come out today showing us that Russian patrol boats of the Russian Navy and Coast Guard are now being equipped with drone nets to stop them from being attacked by air drones at sea. This is starting to become such a present threat for the Russian Navy's patrol vessels around Crimea that they actually are having to equip these with drone nets for a legitimate purpose of...
Actually, they're not putting them on there for drones. Actually, the Russians corrected it and they put out a new statement. They said there's currently apparently a infestation of killer bees that have moved into the area, and they're simply trying to keep them off the equipment.
Oh, yeah, the very, very Russian of them. You know, killer bees is a common problem in Russia, I've heard.
Yeah, it is actually. The killer bees are very loud. They make a buzzing noise, but they kind of sound like reminiscent of a two-stroke, like a little bit, like, you know, those two-stroke motors, like those little, those dirt bikes and stuff like that. So very big bees. I've never seen them quite like those.
I'd have to say, but we can see the drone nets here in a couple of pictures showing us that they are getting their drone defenses up and ready. We also were able to additionally see some attacks on these very sorts of coastal patrol boats here in these clips that were issued by Ukraine, which is generally a montage of their attacks within the Crimean area and also in southern Russia. And we're going to be muting that audio right there. I mean, they hit that.
They giving us that triple step, that dub step.
And we see here that was their intro, and now we're about to get into the meat of the actual strikes. We can see here a Russian patrol boat right there trying to fire its air defenses at the drone. And we can actually see the rounds flying by in little bursts, but it's not really hitting it. And that's the patrol boat that they're about to be hitting. This is a part of the Russian Coast Guard.
Look at it smoking up a storm back there.
So actually, let me explain the beginning of that clip again, because I didn't really explain a whole lot here. So when y'all see those bursts right there from the ship, it kind of looks like it's a bigger gun firing like one round at a time. What that actually is, it's that little gun right up here. I believe these things are called the AK-630s, but these are the Russian equivalent of the Sea-Wiz air defense system on U.S. warships, and they have one at the front of this vessel and one at the rear. The one that we're watching in the clip is actually the stern gun that's firing, and after it fires each little puff or burst of rounds, you can actually see them flying right here. There they are, all around the drone for that brief second. And kind of a wider spread, almost kind of like a shotgun. But the problem is that they're all missing. They're not hitting this drone. So this thing's just literally flying through a hail of gunfire, and the actual Sea-Wizzes that are supposed to shoot this thing down aren't shooting it down.
Why do they keep showing pictures of it like it's a eulogy? Like they keep showing pictures of here's what he used to be like before the unfortunate thing got a hold of it and mangled him.
Man, bro, if they put real music over this, man, it'd be "In the Arms of an Angel." Man, like they're starting to sing that funeral song, "Fly Away," man. Man. But they hit the stern of this thing pretty hard, from what we could tell, at least. Right next to the gun. You could see the gun burning hot right there as they fly right by it.
Oh, dang. Dang, hit it from the back. Look at that. Literally right in the rear.
Hey,
my
yo.
goodness, you're about to get another one. Hey, pause. Wait a minute. Wait a
Man,
second.
they hit it in the back. Blew it out.
Wait a minute. You know, sometimes my mind's not always in the gutter like that. So, hey, yo.
Man, I tell you. But we also are able to see this Tor M2 getting hit right here as well. Then we could also see them
back too.
Oh, well, actually, that's that Tor M2 blowing up in the distance right there. It looks like it had a critical ammunition explosion of all of the missiles in their little VLS cell in the turret. Not a good day for the operators of that Tor.
Man, I guess you could say they tore this tour up.
Man, hell, I'm telling you.
Look at them bobbing and weaving. They were, what the heck is this thing?
I don't even know. It looks like a radio tower of some sort. And we see them hitting the thing again. Oh, wait a minute. Hold up. Let me look around there. It might be a radar, actually.
Bro, it looks like a prison camp from the wrong time period.
What the hell is this thing over here on the left?
I'm telling you, bro, it looks like a prison camp.
Man, they're hitting a babushka's prison bleed. I mean, it's like, damn.
So I think that's probably where they filmed The Great Escape. Look at this. It looks like they're in the middle of the ocean.
It looks like they're probably near some place close to the Kinburn Spit. We can then see them hitting a Ruski railroad bleed. An oil train, as a matter of fact. And we can also see them hitting that Russian ship that was in the port of Berdyansk again. And also the loading cranes at the port as well, which we didn't see in prior clips. As Hal Rose threw in a 333. Dang!
Whoa! Oh, Hal coming in with a 333. That's very nice right there. We're now up to almost $3,400 raised. Literally right now, we're almost $1,000 above the goal.
Dang, man. That's crazy, really. We also see
the Russians can't say the same thing. They're below the goal. They can't protect one damn thing.
Oh, boy. We can also see them here hitting a Russian position inside this building. The entrance, the lobby, as a matter of fact. Now they're going for the roof, bullet.
The Mac Mansion. Oh, dang, they're really doing a number on this thing. Damn, man.
Damn, man, they're ripping apart the Mac Mansion.
Damn, they are literally taking it. Oh, holy crap, bro. They demolished it.
Damn, bro, they did that with 4 drones. Oh my god, dude. It went from a totally fine-looking building to gone in 4 drones.
Jeez, man, those things are like freaking termites.
Dang, that is rough. We see some passerby footage here. And now we can see them hitting another building. About to shred this one in 4 drones. Man, they call this one the 4 drone special.
Man, they had to call these drones right here the shredders. And you know they could say that the drone operators are shredder operators with a cheddar.
Man, oh, did they just collapse the middle of that building with 2 drones?
Wait a minute, go back? Well, I thought it was already collapsed. They didn't do that with 2 drones. There's no way.
No, it wasn't collapsed like that before. Watch, you can fly in, see? Building intact here. Building not intact here at end. Like, after this drone, see? Building intact. See? Floor's intact. Next drone come in, building collapse.
Play it some more. Let's see it. Keep playing it.
You see, building not built with wall that go diagonal. Building built with straight
keep playing
wall.
it. Let's see the rest of it. Oh, it is actually see-through. That is crazy. I don't even understand how that could even happen.
Man, they gave this one the 0-1 too. And we see them also hitting this building as well. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly what the reason for these buildings getting hit is. They're probably Russian command posts or logistics or communications hubs, is what we're assuming.
They are tearing this place apart. This whole joint right here, like they're just tearing this thing up.
Man, I'll tell you. And I'll see them going down for another target there as another Ukrainian drone looked to be heading off somewhere else. And we can see that all of the compounds are now on fire after the successful attack. But that's seen in that clip, and moving us on from that and on out of that area of Crimea, we've also been able to see that within the area of Sevastopol in the general port area, we also got to see a clip as well showing the Ukrainians hitting locations within this area, which we just showed in the larger montage. But moving us on down to Sevastopol, we also got to see a large fire that broke out at the Belbek airfield from last night's attack.
Dang.
We believe this was the ammunition.
Must have the fuel storage or something off to the side of it. He says the Belbek airfield, didn't you?
Yes, but the fire at the Belbek airfield is actually within this area somewhere down here, and this looks like it may be an ammunition pit, possibly, with how the berm's been constructed around here. So it looks like it may have been some sort of an ammunition explosion.
Jeez, I tell you, Crimea got slammed last night. Like, they were getting hit all over the place. And I don't recall seeing this footage from last night, so this must have been one we missed.
Man, it must be.
Охуеть!
Bruh.
He's in shock.
Man, honestly, I think everybody in Sevastopol was shocked. They literally woke up to the morning sun at 2 in the morning. Moving us on out of the Belbek airfield area, we have also been able to see that near to the area of the Kinburn Spit, there was also some significant explosions and strikes that were conducted in this area. These were against Russian headquarters operating some of the Russian regiments within this area of the front.
Просто 6 жестких дронов уебало, охуеть. Вот аквапарк Генический за ним прям. Охуеть.
Man, it sounds like a train's running by.
Kind of does. I think it's a car out there, but it sounds like a train.
I need to get that car checked. That doesn't sound right.
I'd have to say. But moving us on from that, we also were able to see the location on firms on fire, which is confirming the strike. Moving us on out of that, we've also been able to see that unfortunately there wasn't a great deal of footage, as a matter of fact, from the Ukrainian front lines today. Sadly, footage from the front lines can kind of get sparse these days for unknown reasons. Some days there's a deluge of clips, other days it's fairly short. Today we unfortunately had absolutely no clips from the front line itself, but we do have a general overview to give y'all. For one, the Ukrainians, according to Timothy Milovanov, stated that Ukraine is fast-tracking the FP-7 Freya, a domestic anti-ballistic missile built to hunt Russia's Iskander-Ms. So it does appear the Ukrainians are working on their own missile-based air defense systems for some of the threats that Russia throws at them that mobile-based fire groups really can't deal with. Firepoint is welding it together from ready European components instead of waiting for years for a scratch system, and that's according to United 24 as well. So it does appear pretty clear at this point that the Ukrainians are just creating their own solutions to their own problems, considering that Western manufacturing and also Western support doesn't really arrive in the kind of quantities or figures that they're really looking for. We also got to see the Russian casualty report over the course of the day as well. And holy moly!
My goodness. Man, I tell you what, I don't know what's up with this, but they're hitting Bobcat special equipment literally every single day. I think what was yesterday was like the 7, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 7, I think.
Honestly, that's wild. Another 5 today. They're hitting literally depots full of the stuff.
And I would have to say they definitely are. And over the course of the past 24 hours, Missed East and Keeper the record stated 325 auto and fuel tanks is the 5th highest daily loss, 82 artillery pieces is tied as the 15th highest, 2,131 drones is the 20th highest, and 13 ground robotic complexes is the new highest daily loss, which is pretty significant to see. And over the past 24 hours, we were able to confirm that 1,170 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed, along with 4 APCs, 325 supply trucks, 1 main battle tank, 82 artillery pieces, 2,131 drones, 2 MRSs, 2 cruise missiles, 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems, and 5 Bobcat skid steers. All in all, a pretty impressive day and a very good thing to see. But moving us on from that, we did unfortunately see that Dnipro did come under a heavy drone attack over the course of the night, which we saw in the clip right here. And we see one of the impacts in the distance in the town of Dnipro. And moving us on out of that clip, it's now time for us to get to Kyiv and to the speech from the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And so, without further ado, hopefully this loads here really soon, any minute now, here is the speech from the President of Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky. Peach!
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці і українки. Перш за все, наша влучність, наші далекобійні санкції проти Росії за цю війну. Сьогодні дуже масштабно Сили оборони України, наша Служба безпеки України, наша розвідка відпрацювали по московському регіону. Хороша хвиля наших діпстрайків забезпечуємо Україні цю можливість. Дистанція до цілей цього разу більш ніж 500 кілометрів. Це вагомо ще й тому, що московський регіон найбільш насичений російськими засобами ППО. Вони свій район влади бережуть найбільше. Але українські далекобійні кроки вже це долають. Як я вчора і казав, росіянам треба думати про свої НПЗ, про свої нафтові об'єкти, про свої підприємства, а не про те, як зламати життя інших народів в Україні, чи в Молдові, чи в будь-якій іншій країні-сусідці. Також наші сили оборони відпрацювали за цю добу по об'єктах на тимчасово окупованій території, зокрема в Криму. І ця наша далекобійність – це те, що значно змінює ситуацію і загалом сприйняття російської війни в світі. Багато партнерів зараз дають сигнали, що бачать, що відбувається і як все змінилося і в настрої щодо цієї війни, і в досяжності російських цілей на російській території. Війна цілком передбачувано повертається в родну гавань. І це чіткий сигнал, що не варто зв'язуватися з Україною і йти несправедливою загарбницькою війною проти іншого народу, саме проти народу. Важливо, що ми даємо такий сигнал і даємо саме сьогодні, в день пам'яті сотень тисяч жертв тоталітарних репресій родом саме з Москви. Сьогодні вранці ми з Оленою в Биківні вшанували пам'ять усіх жертв радянського терору, жертв репресій. Обов'язково пам'ятаємо, що незалежність наша, незалежність України – це в тому числі гарантія безпеки від тоталітаризму. Незалежність бережемо. Я хочу також сьогодні подякувати нашим воїнам, тим, хто зараз на фронті, кожній бойовій бригаді. В цьому році багато зроблено і відчувається зміна балансу дій на передовій. Зокрема, за сьогодні показники активності такі, що наших активних дій за добу більше, ніж російських. Це дуже серйозний результат. Ми будемо збільшувати всі форми постачання для нашої армії, дронів, НРК, снарядів, всіх ресурсів, щоб підтримувати належний захист і наші фронтові активні дії. Ще одне. Буде на тижні значна кількість наших контактів з європейцями, різні формати, і на лідерському рівні теж. Ми готуємось до комунікації з американцями, ми працюємо з ними фактично кожного дня. Потрібні вагомі політичні міждержавні результати. Такі результати можуть бути і на командному рівні зараз їх готуємо. Кожен день має давати Україні результати. Кожен день. Наша сила і наша далекобійність має ставати більшою. Дякую всім, хто з Україною. Слава Україні!
Iram Slava.
And the Ram Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from the President of Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky, here on day 1545 of the news from around the world. And that's going to be moving us on to the second segment of the stream, where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all. And I got to say, folks, that it has been one hell of a news night to be able to cover for all of y'all once again. We've had a peak viewership of 20,000 people here over the course of this night, and 141,000 people who watched this stream since the start. We're entirely honored and greatly appreciative to have had all of y'all here tonight watching the show, and I hope they have enjoyed it greatly. And we're about to be getting on to the second segment of the stream, to where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about all kinds of interesting stuff, of course, things that do not pertain to religion, politics, climate change, or whether the A-10 is relevant in modern warfare or not. And Matthew, do we have any other top donors to call out in between the last segment and this one?
Yes, we do. And also, by the way, we are just shy of $3,500 raised. So we are almost officially $1,000 above the original goal, which is fantastic to see, by the way. And that is fantastic work by the LLC. And we do appreciate that very, very much for yet another successful Sunday night fundraiser stream. But to call up the top donor since the last time, we do have a 333 from none other than Hal Rose. And thank you very much, Hal, for that very generous donation to the fundraiser of the night. We also had a 50 from William Fielkowski, as well as a 50 from Cerebrus 3, a 50 from Fusion Nev, as well as a 50 from EMJ 6446. And so far, that is the top donor since the last segment. A huge shout out to them and everybody that donated tonight. But Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta say, a humongous shout out to everyone once again for y'all's incredible support of the fundraiser. We've been able to reach unbelievable heights at this point tonight on the fundraiser, thanks to all of y'all's incredible support, and hopefully we'll be helping out people in Ukraine massively through Razom For Ukraine. So a humongous shout out to each and every single one of y'all once again for y'all's incredible support, because the folks that were able to call out who supported the fundraiser and the folks that were not able to call out are all responsible for getting the fundraiser to where it is right now. So a huge shout out to all of y'all once again. And with that in mind, we're going to start getting into the questions. So what do we got, Matthew?
Also, we just got a $69 donation from none other than fakin'something.com. A huge shout out to them as well, because they just took us over officially $1,000 above the goal. Fantastic work once again, and a huge shout to you for helping us to reach that point right there in the fundraiser. But it's now time to jump into our live chats, super chats, and also not only that, but our Morse code decoders as well. And starting off with those Morse code decoders, we had tonight Paul, Kevin, Mason, Joni, Norm, Arabelle, Her Royal Fluffiness, Kush, Kovateric, Sire, and Brian, and it said the Morse says Putin is now facing the full reality of the delusional war every single day in LLT, LSA.
And it and that is the sound of money. And y'all got the dent on the nail. That is the Morse code message of the night. I got to congratulate y'all greatly in the Lee Spring Army Stone Corps for getting that correct time and time again, because y'all are always showing the Lee Spring Army Stone Corps and the Lee Spring Army what the Morse code message is, which is always a pretty impressive thing to see. And so with that in mind, it is time for us to start getting on into the questions. So what do we got?
All right, so starting off first, we're going to jump into our super chats, and then we're going to grab our live chat questions of the night. So our first super chat goes to none other than Little Bear, and thank you very much, Little Bear, for that generous $50 super chat, and we do appreciate that very much. They said, "Good day, gents, and can you clarify what the explosion in Israel was, please? I have heard it may have been at the Atomic Research Facility," from a different YouTube channel. Also, by the way, I think I heard someone mentioning that earlier today. I think they're just mistaken, because a fusion explosion, or not a fusion explosion, but a fission reaction that is associated with atomic weapons going off, that creates a very bright white flash. It's usually a double flash, and like the Enforcer mentioned last night, you can't look at it. It blinds everybody in the vicinity, and it literally burns your retinas out. So it definitely wasn't atomic, definitely not. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it was more of a conventional explosion. I think that some people are just kind of getting a little bit confused or really excited, because, I mean, it was a huge explosion. I mean, nobody can deny that. But from what we can tell, it was certainly a conventional explosion of some sort. It was not blinding to the people who viewed it. And there was a huge amount of people that viewed it in the surrounding area. And also, a nuclear explosion of any type would be causing a humongous amount of damage to the facility and the surrounding area, which we haven't been able to see. And we also haven't heard of any elevated amounts of radiation within the surrounding area, which would truly exist in that sort of a scenario if any form of radiological incident had happened. And we're not hearing of any elevated amounts of radiation anywhere. And before people say, well, Israel would keep that secret, they would, but would they be able to keep that secret from people like Jordan right next door, where the current prevailing winds would blow any of that fallout over into, and then we would hear from the Kingdom of Jordan that they're reporting elevated levels of radiation in their country as a result of whatever happened. So we're just not seeing any proof at the moment that that was any form of a nuclear explosion. It appears to have just been a extremely large conventional explosion at the moment that happened at the facility. So a huge thanks to you for the support, and I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a $50 support from Old Warrior Fella. And thank you very much, Old Warrior, for that generous super chat as well. He said 300 Cuban drones are not much of an offense, but could really mess with an invasion fleet. And I doubt there is any threat of attack unless the U.S. starts it.
And I would generally agree. 300 drones just really doesn't pose much of a threat, even to be entirely honest, to an invasion fleet, because a single U.S. destroyer could probably deal with about 100 drones on its own. So if you had 3 early Burks in the area, you'd be able to deal with pretty much the entire Cuban drone force in one go with one load of ammo on all 3 of those Burks. So I would say that it's not really a big enough threat to justify any type of military action against the Cubans. And also on top of that, attacking them could open up reciprocal attacks where they actually use those drones against U.S. forces and installations inside of the United States within the areas that are in strike range, and that would definitely not end well because we don't really have any effective defenses at the moment against drones in any large capacity. The war against Iran has proven that without a doubt, because we had a huge basing of air defenses within the Middle East when that war started, and yet the Iranians were still able to easily overwhelm those air defenses with just several hundred drones and start landing hits left, right, and center on any facility within the region that was housing U.S. forces. So I would say that it's probably not that smart of an idea, and on top of that, Cuba's in no position to be the one who starts an opening attack because they have no way to sustain a conflict once they begin a preemptive attack. They conduct the preemptive attack, and that's literally all the ability that they had, and after that, it's all gone. They don't have an air force, they don't have a navy, they really don't have an army. So outside of the drone attack forces, they can't do anything else, and then they basically just open themselves up to getting bombed endlessly, and there's a legitimate justification for us to do that. And they have no one really to turn to at that point because they started it. So I'd agree with you, Old Warrior.
It'd be like somebody kicking the bull. It's like, who's going to do that? It's like you're going to walk up to a bull and kick it and try to run away from it. It's like he's going to catch you. It's like it would make zero sense at all. It just feels like I understand why people are saying it feels a little bit manufactured because even if it is true, like even if they have the drones, which I believe they probably do, it's just not that serious to make it out to be a reason for invasion.
Yeah, I would have to say it just doesn't really justify an invasion. I think at this point they're just grasping at straws to try and make a justification. And now apparently Cuba's 2 weeks away from drone killer weapon, and Cuba was promised to the United States 300 years ago. So I think we're just trying to come up with justifications at this point to start a conflict with the Cubans.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, man, you got to be careful. They're going to get close to highly enriched batteries very soon. They're going to be putting those highly enriched batteries in that very dangerous cylindrical drone, those centrifuge drones.
Man, God forbid they ever get those lithium batteries of mass chargeduction. I mean, God forbid. I mean, that's going to be a world-ending scenario right there. Man, imagine if they get their hands on some DGIs. Good God, man, the damage that could cause.
You know what's worse than, highly enriched batteries? Even worse than that, don't let Cuba come up with a cure for cancer. It could be over with. And don't let oil be found there either. I hope oil's not there.
Man, they better pray, man, that not a single piece of paper from one of those files floated down onto their territory and they happen to pick it up and read it. Oh, God forbid. That's going to be it. That's going to be it, folks.
It's more dangerous than Mao's little red book. It's the files.
God forbid, Matthew, that they do anything that drops the Dow below 50,000 points. We'll have lost a mandate of heaven if they do that.
Oh, I tell you, unfortunately, I think tomorrow the Dow might. In fact, I think the Dow is below. Yeah, it is actually below 50,000 points. It's 500 below. Yeah, it's a long time. It's definitely a long time. It's at 49.5 right now. So yeah, it's a little bit low. It looks like tomorrow could be ugly. I'm not really sure why, folks. I'm not really sure why. It looks like the oil market's not having a really good go tonight with the futures, and it looks like the futures for the stock market's not looking good either. I guess maybe the investors woke up today and looked at the news. Maybe I'm not really sure.
In the words of Mr. Wonderful, they woke up and smelled the bankruptcy. I suppose. I hear that that guy's really popular right now in the States.
Yeah, I don't think he's very popular.
Well, not
Mr.
popular
Wonderful.
positively, but popular negatively. Like,
Oh
people aren't
yeah,
liking him.
yeah. I don't know. I can kind of understand why.
Yeah, I gotta tell you. But outside of that, folks, I gotta tell you, with this whole Cuban thing going on, it's more important, folks, that we talk about those poor Congress members that are only getting paid $180,000 a year. I mean, that's
Oh
hardly anything.
yeah,
That's hardly
you
anything
heard
to be able to
that,
live off of. I mean, they gotta speculate on stocks on the side to be able to put food on the family, folks. I mean, that's only reasonable.
man. Talking about being out of touch, by the way, do they not know how many people in America actually make over 150,000 a year? Not a
None.
lot. It's like what is that? Like the top 1% in America that makes over 150,000 a year right now? Like, I mean, barely anybody makes over 150,000 a year. I mean, doctors, lawyers, dentists, maybe. It's like everybody else is making like what 60 to 80,000 a year, I think, or something. And it's like some families bring home 80,000 a year in total between the husband and the wife. I would say the Congress people need to get in touch with reality.
A member of the House of Representatives earns an annual pay of $174,000.
Yes, top 1%.
Yeah, that's top 1%. And I remember, folks, the justification is that $174,000 is 30% less than what it was when they upped the salary to that amount. I think it was like 2 decades ago. And so it's hard for them to get by on that amount of money. And it's like, that's crazy, because it's like, that's also the same for everyone else's wages in the country. They haven't gone up in like 20 years, and it's 30% less purchasing power. But what's crazy, folks, is that if you ask that same guy, and I'm not trying to get political here, but I do have to say, if you ask that same guy if he'd be willing to work on a bill that would raise the federal minimum wage, he would tell you hell no. But at the same time, it's not enough for Congress members to pay off of to get paid $175,000 a year. Imagine.
Yeah, that's pretty stupid, I will say. It's like, maybe if they actually like paid attention and they would realize, if you're complaining about your 170,000 being eroded by inflation, can you imagine how, like, for example, $60,000 a year has been eroded by inflation? That's why people are saying, we can't afford to live because, the inflation's eating it all away. So if you don't make the top 1% salary, you're basically in the hole every month.
And also, here's the question. How many days is the Congress in session every year? How many days is Congress in session every year? So in terms of legitimate working days, Congress is only in session from 140 to 170 days per year on average. So they spend 6 months out of a 12-month year working, and they get paid 175,000 US dollars, and yet they complain. You know how many days we work, folks, on this channel? Almost 365 days a year. In reality, it's probably like 320 or 310, but definitely nowhere close to 140 to 170 days out of the year, which is only half of the year. And they're getting paid $175,000 to work for half the year. That's kind of crazy, That sounds like entitlement to me, to make it sound like they're owed $175,000 even, because it's like that's only half the year they're
Yeah.
legitimately working.
Also, by the way, I see a viewer in the chat. They put in some stats from some recent data. Also, by the way, I'm not saying you're like trying to mix stuff up, but the statistic, I take an issue with the statistic. Here's what the statistic allegedly says. The total of Americans making over $150,000 a year combined is roughly 26% of U.S. households. I don't buy that for a second. I don't buy that. You're telling me a
Households,
quarter
though.
of
That's
yeah,
the
but I mean, I
husband
don't
and
buy that
wife.
even. Yeah, I don't buy that with it being the whole household either. Like, I don't buy that for a minute. Like, you're telling me that over a quarter of the American population is making over 150,000 household? I don't buy that.
Also, on top of that, if that's per household, and we were assuming that the husband and wife were making the same amount, that means that they're making both about 75,000 a year on average, which is nowhere close to 175,000, because that's per household. This Congress member isn't like a man and a woman combined in a legal marriage. That would be something that would be worthy of like Barnum and Bailey's freak show if they happen to be the husband and wife at the same time as one person. This is just a singular person with a single job. What single individual in this country has a job where they make $175,000 a year and only work 140 to 170 days out of the year. There's nobody out there with a job like that.
Yeah, not really. Also, it says here, I pulled it up. It says, how much money do you need to earn to be in the top 1%, 5%, or 10% of earners? And this is adjusted for inflation, apparently. So it says here that the top 1% had an adjusted gross income of at least $561,000. And those in the top 5% made over $170,000, while breaking into the top 10% required an income of $99,000. I could have sworn when I was in high school, I checked this data right here, and the top 1% was anybody making over like 150,000 a year. That shows you how bad inflation is, because now to make it to be in the top 1%, you need to make over $500,000 a year. I don't recall that being the top 1% just like 6 years ago.
Let's see here. Earn in US. I need to go look at this myself now. Dang. To be in the top 1% of earners, you need to make roughly over 700,000 to $1 million a year. Damn, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's not the way it used to be. I can tell you that's not the way it used to be. That's absolutely not.
You know, back in the day, man, they told, like, in school, like you were saying, it was like 100-something thousand and you were in the top 1%.
Yeah, that's wild. I think that shows people like to be considered rich these days, or like wealthy. Like it used to be, if you made over like $100,000 a year, you were considered doing pretty solid at that point. Like you were doing pretty good. Now it's considered like you're wealthy if you make like $500,000 to $1 million a year. That's insane. Like 6 years ago, that would be considered like you'd be like insanely wealthy, making $500 to $1 million a year. Now it's considered being in the top 1%, which is a little bit wild.
Man, honestly, that's insane. That's nuts, really. Like, I can't believe that. Because the last time I checked that, it was like 150,000 or something. If you made more than that, you were in the top 1%, which, you know, back then that seemed like that would be tough to achieve. And now you've got to go and make 700,000 to $1 million. I mean, honestly, I'm having to repeat that because it's hard to even process that. Because you would literally have to be making money hand over fist these days to even be able to say you're in the top 1%. Back in the day, you could just have a good paying, decent job and be in the top 1%. Now you got to go out there and like strike oil or something to be able to be in the top 1%.
Yeah, and you know the unfortunate side of it, there is no such thing as like the wealthy versus the average. That's not really a thing anymore. That whole middle class thing has been pretty much destroyed to the large degree. So you're either wealthy and well off, or you're poor and struggling. There is no in between anymore, where it's like, oh, I'm just like, you know, I'm just getting by, I'm doing okay, I'm making my bills and stuff like that. Now it's either struggling or not struggling, which is an awful way to function, by the way.
But you know, everybody, in times of economic hardship in this country, we really don't need to be keeping those average Americans in mind. You know, those common peasant peons that, you know, are really having a hard time even affording an apartment in mind. No. We need to have sympathy for those poor, innocent Congress members that are really having a tough time getting by. It's only that most of their net worths increase in the millions every single year, just weirdly enough, off of, you know, that salary. We really need to be keeping them in mind and increasing their pay. Otherwise, we just need to accept the fact that speculation in stocks is a very solid side hustle for them, to be able to put food on the table for their family. And, you know, it's just insane. Like, when you think about that, even it's like, who in the hell out there in the United States has an income where they have disposable money to just go throw at stocks even? Like, that whole thing was just so detached. It's like, man, it's like saying in Congress, oh, you know, poor us Congress members, we all don't have our own private yachts. We each need to have our own private yachts with our own name, like, painted on the front of the thing.
Yeah, we better be careful though, and make sure we're paying the Congress people good, because if we're not careful, we might drive out all the smart ones, and we might be left with the dumb ones.
Psh, that happened a long time ago. like,
I know that was a joke.
Man, that's a sad joke right there. It's like, damn, man, when was the last time we've seen a smart senator or a representative? It's been a minute. Like, it's been a good minute. So, you know, I don't know. I don't know if y'all have heard also as well lately. But you know, that whole data center thing up in Box Elder is still going on. Did you hear, Matthew, that there's like 3 or 4 other data centers that they're also trying to build in different parts of the state? Did you hear about that?
Oh, you know, there's data centers all over Utah. Like there's, I mean, just in the Salt Lake Valley alone, there's probably like, I can count 20, 30, 40 of them.
But yeah, but they're like smaller ones, aren't they?
A medium sized, medium sized. There's also that massive NSA one that's the biggest in the country. Also, right here, by the way, Utah is a lot. There's a lot of data centers out here.
Man, I like this one. This one you can see from everywhere, by the way. It's actually pretty crazy. You drive right below it, and you can't really see it from this road right below it, right here near Beef Hollow Road, which is a very weird
No, no,
view.
you can see it from Mountain View, the yellow one you're looking at. You can see it from there. You can't see it from Redwood.
Why do they not have a street view going down that road?
I don't think they like the streetcar going right through there. It's a new road.
Oh yeah, it is a new road, but it's right up there. You can kind of see it from here. This is the road that I know it from. But yeah, it's a fairly new build. Like so, a little fresh and all. I do have to tell you, folks, I actually did get to see this thing from a pretty decent view the other day because I went up Jacob's Ladder Trail here. Let me see if there's a view right here because this is actually where I stopped. Yeah, this is where I actually stopped and turned around right here. And you can actually see it out there, kind of in the distance. This thing has a weird, fragment or artifact in it, but you can actually kind of see it in the distance out there a little bit. But the view from here was fantastic. There's Timpanogos right there, and I think that's Box Elder Peak right there as well. So it was a really cool little view, and this thing goes all the way to the top, which is still about like 4,000 feet up, to the top of the Twin Peak. I mean, the Lone Peak.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But this was a really cool place, though. Like, highly recommend that one. If you're ever in the area and you're a hiking kind of a person, this was a really cool one with some really neat views. Like, here's another example of the view. Really cool, honestly. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to get on into some more questions. And so, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so our next super chat goes to none other than Paul W. And thank you very much, Paul, for that $50 support. And he said, Slava Ukraine.
And no Slava. And a humongous thanks to you for support, Paul, and helping this channel to keep it running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it rolling. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a $50 support from fakeandblank.com, and they warned me ahead of time to be careful with this one, so I'm going to look out. But thank you very much for the support. And I'm going to have to abridge this one quite heavily. Actually, I'm going to have to abridge it and put it in my own words in a side note. I heard Enforcer go, "Oh," so I know
I just saw it. I was like, "Oh my god!" I was like, "Oh." Like,
so Mujtaba has a favorite word. As you know, he's a flamboyant man, Kathleen is Mujtaba. He's quite a sensitive man. He likes to hide away in the bunker, Kathleen, the closet, Kathleen. That's what they say. But he's very flamboyant fellow, they say. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, it is what it is. But apparently he gets really excited when he sees Iran doing well.
well, I'd have to say that's a very interesting story right there. And I thank you so much for the support and helping this channel keep it running and sharing that kind of facts and information with us. We're greatly appreciative of it, and we thank you very much for your report. And so a big thanks to you for the support and helping this channel to keep it running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 20 from Tom Exman. And also, I hope you all like my Seinfeld reference there, by the way. I hope people got that. But also a huge shout out to Tom Exman, who put in a 20. And thank you very much, Tom, for that $20 support. He said, thanks, and take a live chat.
And a big thank you for the support, Tom. And thank you for helping this channel to keep it running. And we will make sure to take a live chat in your honor. So what do we got, Matthew?
So the live chat question is going to go to none other than Bob. And it is Bob. He said, how and when did Cuba receive Shahed drones?
Apparently, according to the reports that came out since 2023 from the Russians and the Iranians, which at that point they hadn't been blockaded, so that might be the reason why or how they were able to get the drones. So I hope that does answer that question well, and a big thanks to you for support and helping this channel to keep it running, Tom. And with that, we are on to the next one.
We also have a 20 from Cerebrus3, and thank you very much, Cerebrus, for that $20 support. And they said any other American feel like we're in a catch-22, have to end this war, but continuing without Congress violates the Constitution. I mean, they could just get approval. I mean, they could just try to get approval. I mean, that's the most straightforward way to do it and make the case to Congress and the American people of why it's necessary and be a little bit more transparent. That's probably the simplest way to get around that. But Enforcer, what say you?
But that requires transparency. That requires treating citizens and others as equals, which is certainly something that we don't like these days. I definitely get where you're coming from with that. because it seems like it's kind of going down that path, because the option that Matthew just gave is the one that seems like it's damn like near like poison water to the current administration to even get close to trying to do, is act like others are equals and treat them as equals and act like they're owed an explanation as to why they want to do something and why others should support it. So you're either with them or against them without question. You have no room to ask anything or know anything. That probably will end up being the very issue that we have, Cerberus, is the one you're describing. And, who knows what that's going to cause for the country long term, with how the rule of law is followed. I got to say, folks, one thing I do find interesting speaking about that is that some people say that they support law and order and that they support the Constitution, but then so many people in the country actually don't even understand what the Constitution means. Like, supporting the Constitution is just a catchphrase for them. Like, they don't even understand what the Constitution actually says. And that's something that we've run into a decent bit over the years, are people who will come in and say things very adamantly about this is what the Constitution says, clear as crystal, and there's nothing in the Constitution that supports that. There's nothing in any Supreme Court rulings that supports that. There's nothing in any of the statements by the founding fathers that'll support that, yet they'll insist on it because that's just how they want to believe that the law is written and intended, which is certainly not the case most of the time, which is really a shame. I feel like, folks, one of the biggest failings in school in this country these days is teaching people what the law actually is. And I find it so funny, folks, because people always talk about in school, I don't get taught anything important, like how to file taxes. It's like, well, they kind of try and teach you like how the Constitution works and how the laws of our country work, and then nobody wants to pay attention and they flunk the class like loads of people did at our school, and then they get out and they have all of these stupid ideas about what the law is and it's not, and they just live the rest of their lives off of this notion that the law is whatever they imagine it to be, which is not how the law works. The law is very clear on many things, and I feel like the country really needs to I would honestly say, folks, they, like, being a huge avid person and a supporter of history, they might want to consider, if they're thinking that the curriculum would be too much at this point, just to drop most of world history and just focus entirely on state history, state law, and U.S. history and U.S. law, just to try and fix the gap of people who have significant failings in legal understandings and constitutional knowledge in this country. This is getting to the point that a lot of people vote in officials, like on all ends, that say things that are definitely not supporting the Constitution, and then they believe that these people are working within the parameters of the law when sometimes they're certainly getting in very questionable gray area, or they're just not at all. But outside of that, I hope that does address that the best I can, because that's my 2 cents on it. But with that, it is time for us to get some live chats. And so, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so moving into our live chat questions here, we have a lot of really good ones. Also, by the way, I just want to address something I saw in the chat real quick. I see people talking about the data centers, by the way. Also, we definitely know about that data center thing, that whole controversy up there in the north part of Utah. We've definitely heard about that, and I've watched that whole thing from beginning to end. That was appalling, to say the least, that the people were largely ignored to a large degree about not wanting the data center. But here's my thing about the data centers, folks. The data centers, I think people are starting to realize this. They're building these things all over the place. They make a whole bunch of racket. They're noisy. Like, that's the racket part of it. They use the water up. They create massive amounts of heat. And they basically take for the resources of an entire community. And I mean, what do they give back to the community in return? Really nothing, if you really think about it. It's like, it's taking the resources, it's driving everybody's costs up for everything, which people are already struggling. So that's the last thing they need, is their bills to go driven through the roof. And who's footing the bill? It's the people footing the bill for it, not the people building the data center. And that's completely wrong. Like, no matter how you put it, people can say national security all day long, as many times as they want to say it. National security has nothing to do with basically, extorting, or not really extorting, but basically, what's the way to say it? Taking the resources and providing nothing in return. That's the only way I know how to word it. That doesn't explain that away whatsoever. So I think people are starting to get tired of the data centers, and it looks like some states are putting a moratorium on building those data centers to a large degree, which honestly, more states should be doing that, because we shouldn't trade, quote unquote, national security in exchange for ruining the entire environment.
I would definitely agree. I don't get the appeal of the data centers. And on top of that, it's not like they're wealth generating and producing jobs for average people. They're actually taking away their jobs because they're replacing jobs by making them redundant. And so it's not providing any benefit to the public whatsoever to see that these things are built in any capacity. So I don't get the whole point of the push of this because it's like each data center, especially this one that's going to be built up in Box Elder County, if it's actually 40,000 acres, that thing is going to unemploy so many people in this country. Nobody stands to make any money in the public off of this thing. Only the people who are the investors that are building this thing stand to make any profits. Everyone else stands to lose quite a great deal. And that's an absolutely ridiculous sort of a stance to take that I've been hearing lately, that if you're against it, you're clearly working for the Chinese or you're paid by them. It's like that is such a sad construction right there. To say that people are wanting to protect their locality from basically just being exploited, and also seeing that others lose their jobs in this country to the AI wave that's taking over, are paid by the communist Chinese. That's ridiculous. I would say that it would be more a pro-Chinese authoritarian position to keep screwing over the people and also localities to try and enrich oneself at the cost of everyone else. I would say that's more authoritarian and communist Chinese than any other solution or outcry that I've heard in the public so far. But
Yeah, they should make these people building the data centers, they should make it a law that wherever they build these things, they must offset every single negative environmental impact that they're causing. That should be a mandatory requirement. And also, they should have zero impact whatsoever on people's the local communities' electricity bills, their water bills, anything like that. If it starts to have an impact, then that company must pay to offset that impact. It should be, I mean, that's common sense. It should be that way. And also, it's like, now I'm hearing, I don't know if this report, I didn't really look all the way into it, but there's a report out there that some data centers being built in a state in this country, and that now the power company in a certain area of the country is deciding to reroute the power from residential homes to the actual data center, and they're going to start selling the power exclusively to the data center. I don't know if that's true, like somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw that earlier today and I didn't get a chance to research it. But if that's true, I mean, that should definitely be outlawed.
I think I heard that there was like a very significant caveat to that one earlier in the day. I forgot the exact wordage that it was, but I think it was something like that power company was already terminating its pretty much control over that region and was handing it over to another utility, and so everybody in that area was already going to have to re-sign new utility contracts with the new utility that was taking over that area, and so then they were all just diverting their stuff to the data center because they were already giving up that region. I think it was something along those lines, but I don't know. I have to look into that one a little bit more. But also,
Yeah, I'll have to look into it. But oh yeah, go ahead. What are you gonna say?
but also speaking of something, I saw someone say something in the chat that I gave a very short answer to earlier. I just said no, but I wanted to give a little bit of a further answer to this because somebody in the chat, when I was saying, people need to know more about the Constitution, somebody said, read the Bible and read the Constitution, or do both together. I'd actually like. I'm a Christian. I want to make that clear. But people who act like the Bible and the Constitution are intertwined are having a significant misunderstanding of how this country operates. Religion is supposed to be completely divorced from the operations of the government, and that's a very common public misunderstanding these days. And I feel like that's what's a big problem that's perverting the country's government these days, is that people want to throw religion into it left and right when it was never designed to be able to do that. The country is designed to take a completely neutral stance on religion. Your relationship with God, or a lack of, is entirely your personal business as far as this country was originally designed, and that's the way it should be. I don't want the government stepping in and telling me how I have to believe or not believe in God, and I don't really think anybody else would like that either. And I feel like I feel like there needs to be clear boundaries, which a lot of people also aren't really getting these days, on where the government's involvement stops. It stops at what you can think, what you can believe, and other things such as that. The government has absolutely no say in telling you what you need to believe, or how the laws need to be structured, whether they need to be structured around the Christ or Allah or Yahweh under the Jewish faith. That's completely outside of the government's purview to do something like that. And it's completely outside of the government's purview to say, unless if you're trying to incite some sort of an open rebellion or an uprising in the country, what you should believe. If you hate the government, you have all the right to hate the government. If you love the government, you have every every right to love it. If you hate the nation, that's a shame, but you have the right to hate the nation. That's kind of the beauty of the whole thing. If you love it, you love it. You get to do whatever you want, and that's where the barrier is drawn, because the rights of the independent individual of this country are supreme, and that's what makes our nation historically unique. Is that we were the first nation in the world to say that the rights of the individual trump supreme over everything. The government has no right to get inside of their mind and start swaying what they think, or forcing them to follow certain religious laws, because that's just not the role of the government. And I would be completely in the belief of that. To each their own. I live my life how I do, and I will never live my life the way that some people do in this country. But they have the right to live their lives however they want, as long as they leave me alone to live mine. It's a live and let live sort of a system. And so I'd say that it's better to just read the Constitution for what it is, without trying to add any religious spin to it or making it seem like it should have some. Because the First Amendment, the very first one, says that there is a freedom of religion in this country, which clearly shows that the church and state is to be divided and should always be divided in operation and practice of the nation's in actions, domestically and foreign. But I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, it is time for us to get on into some more live chat. So what do we got?
And our next one here is actually a super chat. We have 2 more super chats to go, and then we'll get some live chats. This one goes to Cerebrus3, who put in a 20. And thank you very much, Cerebrus, for that $20 support. They said personal finance, civics class, and home ec needs to be mandatory return in the school system.
You know, we actually had those classes in our school, actually, Cerebrus. Sadly, though, they were either like half-baked, like a lot of the teachers that did that stuff really didn't do a good job at it at all. And then also the other half of the problem was that the students didn't really care, because in our school system growing up, and I think this is kind of the prevailing mindset in the country during that time, is that who gives a shit? Basically, that was like the mindset, and nobody really cared to learn anything. Because if you actually seem to be engaged and learning, you get bullied to hell for that. Like, and I'm not talking about, just like being like a super nerd, like wearing the giant glasses stuff. If you just seemed slightly interested in learning anything beyond just, rejecting and butting everything, then you were looked at as some sort of an ultra nerd idiot. And so, in our school, it was basically like culturally enforced by the student body that you couldn't really do anything other than just being useless, basically. And if you were anything more than useless and trying to learn something, you were looked down upon and outcast by the student body. So that was kind of an issue in our school, because our school had the constitutional law classes, the home ec classes, and everything. And a lot of those folks came out of those classes learning basically nothing because they didn't want to learn, and then the teachers really weren't teaching too well either, sadly. I would honestly say, folks, if we want the country's education system to turn around, the education system needs to be a little bit more militant with enforcing rules. Like if a parent comes down and complains that their kid got a C and the kid's stupid, the kid got a C because he's stupid. Maybe you need to discipline him at home and get him on the track of actually focusing and learning, because, we're not going to give this kid free A's and get him all the way up to 12th grade to where he's basically illiterate, just because the parents kept complaining year over year. I feel like that's kind of something that needs to change in this country, because I feel like that's one of the biggest problems. But with that, we are on to the next one.
We also have a 2 from Par Baked Potato. He said, please Google the Onawa Trestle, Maine. It's beautiful.
The Onawa Trestle. Let me pull that up. Onawa Trestle. Let's take a look. Oh, Gadzook. Look at that. It's a big railroad trestle. That's actually a really nice one.
That is nice. That's in Maine?
This is in Maine, and it looks to be operated maybe by the Canadian Pacific, which would now be the CPKC. But
you know what they call this railroad track?
What do they call it?
They call it the Maniac Line.
Oh,
the main line, the Maniac, the line, the train, Maniac Line.
Man, I heard someone the other day called people from Maine Manians. I was like, the hell's a Manian?
I'd have never heard of that.
Sound like they got the mange up there, bro. Like, that damn guy's got the Manian. Man, I tell you something. That's a cool bridge, though. I really like this trestle. There's actually a really big one up in Pennsylvania. A friend of mine that I talk to a good bit always tells me about it, just to hit this one because it's kind of up there in that area. Let's see, here's Bradford, so let me see if I can find it. It's the Kinswa Railway Bridge, which it collapsed a while ago when a tornado, I believe, came through this area. But it was humongous. Let me see if I can show you a picture of it here. at some point when it was actually still standing. Well, I can't, but that gives you a good idea of what it looked like. Honestly, bridges are just incredibly cool. Feats of engineering, every single one of them. And bridges nowadays are pushing the limits like they always have on what's possible. I mean, some of the newest bridges built in the world these days are unbelievably impressive as far as their structural engineering and the architecture involved. But a huge thanks to you once again for support and sharing that interesting trestle bridge with us. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a live chat question. We're moving on to our live chats, by the way. We have our first one from a bike and its boy who said, "Did y'all see the F-18 Growlers collide and crash today?" And I did see that. That happened up in Idaho. I saw that earlier. Thankfully, all four, the two pilots and the two weapon system officers, made it out. Also, another win for Martin Baker, by the way, in the ejection seats. They have another advertisement that quick, that close together. So thankfully they got out. But yeah, that looked like I thought it was fake at first. Like the crash looked fake.
It did. Also, what was crazy is that the two bottom pilots on the bottom airframe that got stuck together, they almost didn't eject because their canopy almost got sandwiched under the fuselage of the other. And I was shocked that they even got out, really, because it looked like for a second the fuselages were going to twist after they had collided, and they were going to get jammed under the other fuselage. But they actually all got to eject. That was an absolute miracle, really.
Yeah, I would say so. Also, I got to say, I'm very glad the pilots and the weapon system officers survived, though. Like, that's the most important thing. But also, on the other side of things, I'm also, sad to see that two Growlers got taken out. Those are electronic warfare aircraft, so they're kind of hard to replace. They're expensive, so that's kind of unfortunate. And it was during an air show, apparently.
Man, Kuwait said, "Man, I shot down three F-15Es." Idaho said, "Hold my beer." Man, it's like, dang, tough days.
Man, it's like how much is that Growler variant?
Quite a lot. I think they're worth let me go check. EA 18G Growler cost. So each one is about $67 million.
Yikes. Yeah, it's expensive. And also, if you factor in the electronic warfare pods, then it jumps up to 125 million per plane.
Yeah, I mean it's not a cheap aircraft at all, and it's a shame to see that they were lost. But I hope that does address that the best we can. And also, I saw someone in the chat. I want to clarify this because one visual I said calling kids stupid is plain wrong. Well, I'm not saying call them stupid to their face. But like if they're not putting in effort, because in our school, like to get to this again real quick, in our school, from my experience, there were so many kids who did not try at all, and they were dumb as rocks by high school. They still had like elementary grade knowledge on a lot of topics, and they were like in 10th and 11th grade. The reason why that's the case is because whenever a teacher would actually give them a correct grade, like if they made an F, they just made an F, their parents would say, "Oh, my little princess didn't make an F," and they come down to the principal's office and just cuss them out, or they cuss out the teacher. And so basically the school staff and the administration were getting bullied, which, a lot of them were hardly doing half of their job. Some of them were great, a decent amount of them weren't, but they were hardly halfway doing their job, and then they were getting bullied, so then they just bumped these kids' grades up to like B's and A's and C's, so that way they just pass on to the next grade, and it was someone else's problem next year to deal with that. And that just kept going until they make it to high school, and they still didn't know squat, and yet they'd still graduate. And then they're going into the workforce not knowing a damn thing about nothing. They can hardly do math. They can hardly read. They don't know history. They don't know the law. They don't know anything. So at that point, their parents really failed them. The education system failed them, and they failed themselves. And what I'm saying is that there's got to be some accountability, because while they're kids, they have to learn, and if they're not putting in the effort, then they're going to get a bad grade. And I mean, it might just take a teacher saying something, not being brutal to them, but saying something like, "You're not applying yourself, you're really cutting yourself short, you need to do better," or something like that, to get them going, and just be honest. Because these kids are going to grow up into a world a lot like we all live in, to where if you don't know shit, the world's going to curb stomp you. They got to learn something eventually. We can't just lie to them their whole lives and screw them over, so that way they can graduate and enter the workforce as basically illiterate and unknowing. That's a disservice to them, really.
True that.
But with that, we're on to the next one.
Aaron, next question goes to the Bearded, who said, "Do we know if the Boxer has made it to the Gulf of Oman yet?"
No, actually. Like, we actually don't know. We know that the Tripoli's been there for a very long time, but we've never heard that the Boxer has arrived within CENTCOM's AOR, or even around Diego Garcia. So, at the moment, I'd have to tell you, we still do not know, and from what we know, they're still on their way through Indo-PACOM at the moment, which has been taking an unbelievably long amount of time, if they're still underway. So I hope that does address that the best I can, and with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a live chat question from Belius, who said, how much damage do y'all think Russia will take before they seriously consider actually using a nuke on Ukraine?
I would have to say I think that the chance of them using a nuke is still incredibly low. I would have to say at the moment I don't really think any level of damage is actually going to get them towards using a nuke. Because the fallout of that, literally and figuratively, would be so bad it would really outweigh the benefits of using a nuke on Ukraine. Kind of like us trying to use a nuke on Iran. Like the negatives far outweigh any of the positives that we could get out of that sort of scenario. So I'd still say the chances are low. They're rising every day, but they're still in the minuscule percentages. I'd say less than 5% probably. But I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we're on to the next one.
Our next one goes to none other than Bijan, who said, do y'all think that India is going to retaliate against Ukraine for the 3 injured workers and the one that was killed?
I doubt it. Generally, foreign nationals in a place like Russia, if they're wounded and killed, the Indian government's just going to chalk that up to it being what it was. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a question from Lady Temperance, who said, have you guys heard anything about the Panama Canal running out of water recently?
Yeah.
Is it possible for it to run out of water?
Yes, it is. And it has been running out of water for some time now, for a couple of years.
How does that, really, like a really simple explanation, like how does that work? Like I thought they just get water in from, the ocean.
No, so actually, the reason why the lock system was built is that they wanted to take advantage of a natural lake called Gatun Lake to be able to basically do most of the work for them. So they dug the little canal ditch over here, and then they dug the little canal ditch, this was the longest part, through here to the lake. But the lake, I think, is about 50 feet or so above sea level. So they have to use a system of locks to be able to elevate the ships, by filling up the locks with water to get them to that height to be able to sail through the lake. But the problem is that every single time a ship is leaving on either end, they just have to vent the water from Gatun Lake and also Lake Alajuela up here into the ocean, the Gulf of Mexico or the Pacific Ocean, to be able to get that ship back down to sea level and then get it out of there. So based off of the replenishment rates at Gatun Lake and Lake Alajuela, they can make a certain amount of passages. Well, actually, in reality, for most of history, they were able to make an unlimited amount of passages per day because the lakes were never running dry. Nowadays, though, because of the ongoing drought that's been going on, because I believe it's the weather element's called like the El Nino, where there's a certain kind of weather depression in the Pacific area, and that leads to far less rain, which is also why Utah is going through a drought. It's affecting the whole western seaboard. But because of that weather element, the Gatun Lake and Lake Alajuela have actually not been getting the rainfall that they historically get normally, and therefore they're actually running out of water due to evaporation and also due to the operation of the canal. So because of that, the Panama Canal Port Authority that's operated by the Panamanian government has actually had to put specific limitations on how many passages can be done a day, and I think right now it's 54 licenses that are given per day for passages. And any more than that, it just can't be done, because then they would start draining the lake even further, and eventually it would become completely impassable.
Well, then I guess that explains it.
Yeah, so, I actually have heard about that before in the past. That's actually something that I've known about for many years, pretty much the whole time we've been running the show, because it's been a problem since about 2020 and 2021 during the COVID pandemic. And it didn't really get a lot of coverage back then because COVID was dominating the headlines daily. But that started back then, and it's been going on till now. And sadly, the weather elements here on the west coast of the country have not changed in really the entirety of the Americas. And so the situation is still going on, and it's still getting worse. So crazily enough, Matthew, they're having their own Salt Lake issue, kind of like we are here in Utah.
Yeah, I just say I put a hose in it.
Man, put a hose in that bee.
Ship it by. We'll just start shipping our stuff by plane instead. That'll fix it. We should just take over the Panama Canal, just invade that too.
Yeah, man. That would probably be something if we invaded and took it over. You'd probably hear the president say, the Panamanians were trying to screw us over. They were only allowing 54 passages a day. That's so stupid. We're allowing 130. Like, in the lake just dries up in like less than a year. It'd probably be something like that. But anyways.
Got to build a data center next to that lake.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Build a data center. That's a wonderful idea. Matthew, why haven't they thought of that yet?
Probably because somebody that's probably really greedy hasn't come along yet to take advantage of this natural resource here that they desperately need to keep the Panama Canal open.
I hear that there's this very bald Canadian guy. He's currently flying over the place in his private jet, or he's selling his infamous yacht. And he's actually going to be coming down here and taking a look at the place, like to see what can be done. So good on them. They're really helping out the world. But anyways,
now, I think some of these people out here, I think some of these people are kind of like yeah, getting off to the idea, basically. Sorry for the vulgarity there, but I didn't know how else to say it. I think some people are like sort of getting off to the idea of like taking from people. It's like, putting a data center in a state that's having water issues. It's like, come on, bro. It's like you're putting a data center in a state that has water issues. There's literally an advisory out right now in Salt Lake City, like down here. There's an advisory out for a water shortage down here, and the Salt Lake's drying up. The federal government literally just said they're going to try to fix that. It's a crisis. So let's put a massive straw in it all and start using water for a data center. It's like, what a stupid idea.
It's like, I don't know. Why don't they put it in like water-rich states like Alabama, where there's plenty of water? I mean, Alabama is one of the wealthiest states in water quantities annually. Like, Alabama is not going through anything equivalent to a drought over in the Pacific. Why don't they put them there? There's
put it out in the ocean.
Man, honestly though, I don't think there would be a lot of resistance to a data center in Alabama because it's already hot as hell. It's like, what is it going to change? Nothing.
Yeah, probably so. They could probably put some there.
Or they could put them in Georgia or Mississippi. Mississippi's got plenty of water. They got that big-ass river.
I don't think they want to put them here.
No, they want to put them there. Think about it, Matthew. It meets all the criteria. Plenty of water, screwing over the local population. It's got everything.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I already heard that they're planning on protecting the data centers too. I heard some, builder of data centers or someone out there, as an investment group or something, was out there talking about, yeah, we'll put up like automated defenses just to mow people down that want to come take down the data center. It's like, oh, okay.
Really?
Oh, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but they were talking about security for the data center and stuff like that. They're already thinking about how to keep the peasants away from their precious data center.
Oh yes, of course. And if you ever ask anyone in Congress, well, look, we're hardly getting paid enough. like we're only getting paid 175 grand a year. I mean, clearly we have to let them do this because otherwise, how are we going to make our bread? You know what I mean? Like, screw y'all, we got ours, whatever. But moving us on from that, we are into the next one.
Our next question goes to none other than Ryoko Hakabi, and hopefully I'm saying your name right, but thank you very much for that live chat question. He said, what's your opinion on the new, soon-to-come-out Leonidas high-power microwave system?
I think that they've got a lot of potential. Any directed energy weapon is largely going to be the air defense system of the future. They're far more accurate, far more cost efficient, and also able to engage targets at about the same rate. So in my honest opinion, they're all the systems of the future, and the Leonidas certainly is one of them.
I thought you said before that they were going obsolete.
What, laser-based systems?
Oh, this is a microwave system.
Wait a minute, I think I was thinking about the Thor. I was thinking about the thing in the container box that had like the little laser reticle on the top that like directed the laser beam at the incoming air targets. Is this not it?
Oh, no, this is actually a different thing. This is like I think this is a truck-based system. I saw a demonstration of the thing on a different YouTube channel. They actually did a demonstration of it. It's like a truck that has like microwave directed energy, and it doesn't focus on actually like hitting it with a laser, like to burn it out of the sky. They just burn all the electronics with the microwaves.
We've talked about
there it
it.
is.
I didn't say this was obsolete. I don't think. I think I said that this thing was like when we were talking about it, it's produced in so little numbers it doesn't count right now. I think that's what the last conversation we had about this thing was, and I think I said that because somebody in the chat, if I'm remembering the conversation right, they were like, oh, Enforcer, you're so stupid. They've got 1 million of these things already in the army. And I was like, well, it worked. I think we actually watched a demo video on this thing taking out like a swarm of drones, and we're like, wow, that it works. But then I was like, there's none of these. They're prototypes, so they don't really matter. I think that's what I said. But outside of that,
It's
go ahead.
It seems like a pretty solid invention, though, because if you can just simply burn the electronics, it doesn't matter if the drone's fiber optic, it doesn't matter if it's being radio controlled or however it's being controlled by Starlink or whatever. If you can just simply burn the electronics, which means that the motors can't communicate with the motherboard in the drone and stuff like that, because you've burned out the connections, then I mean that seems like the best way to get to the root of the problem.
I would say that generally the system probably has a pretty promising future if I'm remembering everything right about it. Problem is though, they have to be able to produce these things at a massive scale. Wait a minute. I think I remember the problem with it. I think these things cost like 25 million a piece, if I remember right.
I don't recall. I don't think they put out a number for how much they cost. Let me see here. What's the cost? Let's see here. It's pennies per shot. Let's see here. They've had millions invested in them, but it doesn't say the system costs that much. It actually doesn't say how much the system costs.
I'm very certain, man, the last time we looked at this thing, because I remember we had a whole rabbit hole in this thing. It costs like a whole bunch of money per unit, if I remember wherever we found that number. And then on top of that, it was still in the prototypical phase, and it wouldn't be out of that for years, last time we talked about this. And so I said it wasn't available now, and it was very expensive, and therefore it doesn't really have that much of a future, because we need cheaper, mass-fielded defense systems that are easy to produce in large numbers. And this certainly wouldn't be available for the here and now.
It says on the Google AI overview that the exact per unit system price is classified.
That wouldn't make a lot of sense, though. Because eventually the price figure for everything has to be made public because they have to acquisition these things. So I don't know. Like, let's see. Wait, let me go look at an article on the side here from one post.
Also, I think some people in the chat are getting confused. Some people are thinking about the active denial system, or I think that's what it was called. There was like this microwave system that the U.S. Army was testing, and they had people stand in front of it, and it was made to disperse crowds, and it was just enough microwaves to like penetrate like a millimeter of skin, and it would create this burning sensation, and it would cause people to run off so they could disperse riot crowds and things like that. It's not that system. This is completely different. This is a completely different system.
So let's see here. I think I'm finding. Let's see here. While the U.S. Connect. Let's see. I'm on their website right now trying to look at this thing and see if they have some sort of a price. Because they were talking about it costs $2 million to shoot down a drone on their website.
No, it's pennies per shot.
Well, no. This is what Leonidas is saying about current air defense issues. Cost correction. That's what.
Are you saying it costs that much now? Okay, I thought you were saying it costs millions to shoot the thing. I was like, dang, it definitely does cost millions.
Well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't cost millions per shot. I mean, that's the whole thing about laser systems is that they cost like dollars or basically nothing to shoot them. But I'm just not seeing anything on the website either about the cost per unit, which is a very important consideration because with how the system looks. And I don't mean to just work off of like a stair. Well, actually, Matthew, that's the demo video that we watched right there that's playing in the background right there. Like where they show them flying the drones.
There's no public cost out there. Like there's just no cost information on the thing.
But if I was to go, folks, off of the stereotypical price for a defense product, this thing looks well built, at least like the prototype that they have out there that they're working on. It's built on top of a Stryker chassis. So I'm assuming that they have an entire control system that's built into the back of this thing because it's an APC, and they probably want the room in an APC to fit all of the additional electronics that would be needed to operate this thing in there. This thing probably costs a good amount of money. And that wouldn't be a problem if it's just a few million, like these things were like 2 to 3 million a unit, because that's about the cost of a main battle tank. And at that point, that makes sense. But if these things cost tens of millions of dollars per unit, like a Tor air defense system, then we're just not going to ever have enough of them because they're going to be too expensive to be able to defend against drones properly with a system. It's definitely a promising one from what I remember on our huge rabbit hole we had a long time ago about it, but they have to be affordable and mass-produced and rapidly. Otherwise, they're largely useless because we would be far better off at that point just getting thousands of pickup trucks not the pavement princess ones, but thousands of pickup trucks that actually are pickup trucks, just putting 50 caliber machine guns in the back of them with an infrared optic on each of them, and then just training a whole bunch of guys in the army how to lead a target that's flying overhead with a machine gun and shoot it down. That would be far easier to field, far more affordable, and in mass number. It's simple, but it works. The Ukrainians have certainly proved that. As long as this thing's affordable, it definitely has a good future. But if it's not, it might run into some issues. But it's a really cool system, I will say that. So I hope that does address the question well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a question from Moki Wabi, and thank you for that support, or that live chat question, excuse me. They said, Enforcers, what is the U.S. options for solving the Iran war? Retreat or annexation or something else? I mean, technically there's only two options, but there's really, in war, there's only two options. You can either keep going or you can simply surrender. It's one or the other. So in this case right now, the U.S. is still abiding by a ceasefire, which really isn't really a ceasefire because Iran's broken it several times. So the U.S. is stalling. That's essentially what they're doing. And we're not exactly sure why they're stalling. It could be they're trying to move some more equipment into place before they either invade an Iranian island or they restart major attacks harder than ever on the Iranian territory. That could be part of it. Or it could be they're actually trying to make a deal, which is a futile effort because Iran has rejected literally everything. They even rejected today all the other new proposals the U.S. made as well. And the U.S. rejected all of Iran's stupid counter proposals. So it's a dead end for talks. So if they're stalling for that, we're wasting our time. The only way forward when an enemy is not willing to concede like that is to keep fighting. That's the only way forward at that point. All this stuff should have been considered before we started the war. If we didn't really have an appetite for war, then we shouldn't have started it. But now we're in it. We can't just walk away from it now. If we did that, that would be incompetence. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree. I'd also have to add, because Mandy pretty much covered everything I was going to say. Every war that we get into, we always have to assume, because this is how real planning works in the real world, that every war that we start is going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight with whoever we started against. Doesn't matter how weak they are, doesn't matter how little they look or how easy it would look, you always have to assume that it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight to the death. And that was what was not done here. We know that for certain, because the President of the United States said that he thought it was going to end so quick that by the time the British would try and join 4 or 5 days in, it would be over. That was said quite literally to a press pool. So we know that it was the idea, which is always the hubris that ends up defeating nations, that it's a little country, it's really weak, we're really strong, and it's going to be super easy. So we're just going to plan it like it's going to be an in and out little adventure over 3 days. Never turns into that. And generally it's a self-defeating prophecy because we assume that it's going to be so easy that if they put up any amount of resistance beyond none, we've already been screwed, basically, as far as the war plan went by then. And so the problem right now is that we failed in that consideration, but now we have to make that our thought. This is going to be a fight to the death with the Iranians. There's no way to walk away because now we're going to be screwed, basically like we've just suffered an unconditional surrender if we just walk away. So now we have to keep fighting, but we have to assume that this fight is now for the survival of the nation at this point, and just fight it along those lines and assume that the Iranians are never going to give up until they're forced to. They're not going to give up easily. So I would say that really our only answer, unfortunately, is to keep fighting. I know a lot of people don't like that, but considering all of the failed planning that's led to us to be at this point right now, which is a very desperate situation, that's our only option, is to continue the fight and hope that things turn around as we continue to bombard the Iranians and try and work towards defeating them at strategic strong points like Hormuz. So I hope that has addressed that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Justin, who said, do you think Russia will collapse this year, mates? I don't think it will. Me personally, on my opinion, I don't think it's going to collapse this year. As people have noted, and also the bots love to bash us about all the time, we have been predicting that Russia could fall at any point, and I still believe that prediction. But the catch is this, though. The one aspect that we really didn't take into consideration a year ago was the fact that China, even in the midst of their economic turmoil, would end up helping prop up the Russian economy. We knew that China was giving support to Russia through military means to fight the war, but we didn't know that they were sending economic support to keep them afloat, quite to the level they're doing. Because technically speaking, if Russia was completely isolated by themselves and didn't have assistance, they would have already collapsed by now. Because their main export, their main way to produce money is through petroleum products, gasoline. That's why they're known as the world's gas station, is because of that. So they've been hit left and right. Their oil export terminals destroyed, their oil refineries destroyed more times than I can count over multiple years, and they're still staying afloat somehow. So that clearly points to outside help, I would say. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree. Eventually, they are going to collapse. The economy will just become too bad off to recover, and it's getting very close to that. And that will start to put enough significant internal dissent in motion that there might be room for a government overthrow of Putin. But that's only if the army's loyalty wavers. If the army's loyalty doesn't waver, the army's going to be mowing down those people in the streets in the tens of thousands, just like we saw in Iran. If the army's loyalty is wavering, which, to be entirely honest with y'all, there's decent room for that right now, because the Russian army is a very corrupt one, and it's also one that's corrupt enough that underlings get screwed over on the basis by their higher-ups well enough, and it's corrupt enough that some people might try and work around that or try and, even the score. So there's definitely room there for a possible coup with how the current Russian government and Russian army is structured. However, if Putin starts to work on giving the Russian army significant amounts of pay, and also, well, specifically in some certain units around Moscow, and also making sure that they live very lavish lifestyles no matter what compared to their fellow countrymen, those Russians in that part of the army are always going to be loyal to Putin, which then would make a coup very tough, because the units that conduct a coup have to be from around the capital. Like, they can't drive in from, say, Yekaterinburg and take the road trip to Moscow, because that would get noticed pretty quickly. They would go, why the hell is the 1193rd Motor Rifle Infantry Regiment packing up from Yekaterinburg without orders and driving to Moscow? Ding, 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 coup. Like, that's immediately what anyone in Moscow would say. And then they say, we want you all to meet them on the highway and kill them, like, if you need to, and stop them from getting here. So those guys would never be able to conduct a coup off in the hinterlands outside of Moscow. So it would have to be the troops in Moscow, one of those regiments in the Moscow military district, that conducts the overthrow, or all of them. And that means that as long as they keep those troops loyal, a coup will be very tough to pull off. Even if the capital started a revolt, they could just start executing people in the streets, and that would keep everything under wraps. Because the Russian citizens don't have guns, the army does, and so the actual power of if the government will change or not is always going to be held by the army at the end of the day in Russia. So I hope that addresses that the best I can. Economically, collapsing for certain within probably the next year. That's without a doubt. Politically, that might take a little bit longer, depending on how all of that unfolds. So with that, we are on to, let me make sure that I'm keeping the count here, to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Elijah. He said, do you think there could be a false flag operation with Cuba in order to justify an invasion? Cuba would be dumb to attack the U.S., so I feel like the U.S. would. Oh yeah, like that's the thing. Like, if there's a legitimate reason, like for example, there are a couple of things that Cuba could have that would actually justify an invasion. If they had missiles or something that we would have a hard time defending against, that they could easily shoot at the United States, and that would cause obviously a major issue with that, then that could clearly justify an invasion. But the problem is, though, they're talking about they have some drones. Drones are a threat, but it's like they're not an existential threat to the United States. And also, we can probably shoot those down before they even get to our coast with the proper air defense. So, it's not a reason to invade. Also, by the way, I mean, they come out with this information after they've been harping on invading Cuba for a month. It's like, why couldn't they have led with this information? It looks like they just found it out of the woodwork now that they came out with it a month later. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree. It seems like they're just trying to find some sort of a reason for a justification, and this is it. There might not ever even be a false flag attack. They might just say, due to the security risk and the reasons of national security, we invaded them because they could bomb us with these drones. And they might not even exist. Because if they existed since 2023, why the hell haven't we heard about this at all for 3 years? Why in the world are we hearing about it just now when the president's getting on this whole raging fantasy about taking Cuba? Like, it's like, that is a very convenient time for this whole thing to come out into the open.
Yeah, and also, why didn't they lead with this? They said in the report that Cuba's been amassing these drones and acquiring them since 2023. It's like that's 3 years ago. It's like so they've had this information at their disposal, allegedly, for 3 years at least. And you're telling me the entire time that the U.S. was advocating to invade Cuba, that they just wanted to bring it out at the last second like this? It's like you would obviously lead with that. You would come out and tell people we need to do something about Cuba because here's why, and point to the evidence. They didn't point to the evidence, and they waited until now at the final hour to start pulling out evidence out the file box that people are now going to question because it came out at the last minute.
But also, here's my thing. Like, this is probably the biggest one to me. Mar-a-Lago is about 100 miles or 110 miles away from Cuba. A Shahed flies fast enough, that's only an hour away. If there was a true threat that was that significant that we have to invade Cuba over those drones, why the hell is the president basically living out of Mar-a-Lago, which is in less than an hour strike distance for those drones? That's like saying we know that there is an assassin hanging out in Colorado Springs, so we're going to fly the president out to Pueblo every weekend and wait and see if that guy comes down and tries to take a shot. Like, it's like that kind of security stuff just wouldn't be overlooked like that all the time. That's extremely risky, because what if there was a gap in the detection time for some reason, and then they only have 30 minutes to react? They can't get them on Air Force One to get them out of there in less than 30 minutes. Like, we've driven around West Palm Beach, there's just no way in hell. So that kind of a response window there is absolutely impossible. There's no way that would ever work, and so that would pose such a security risk. The Secret Service would say, Mr. President, you cannot go to Mar-a-Lago. We're just not allowing that, because the Cubans could, quite literally blow up the building we're in while you're there, and we might not even know until the drones are basically on top of us and we can't leave. And that would pose such a threat, there's just no way that they would hang out there all the time. And yet they do. They hung out there during the raid on to get Maduro, and Maduro was protected, mind you all, by Cuban special forces. So if the Cubans were planning an attack at any point, don't y'all think it would have been then a reciprocal attack to keep their socialist-aligned regime that they were keeping in power in Venezuela in charge? They would have conducted an attack then, and he was hanging out in Mar-a-Lago during that time. Like, to me, folks, that whole side of things alone is showing that there can't be a legitimate security risk from this whole thing, because they wouldn't let the president that close to an imminent threat if that really was the case.
Yeah, I would say so. Although they have defenses around Mar-a-Lago and stuff like that, they have defenses that could protect it. It's not wide open, by the way. Like, I'm sure some people probably think that, but I mean, it's not wide open. They have defenses all around that thing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's not like 300 drones are coming in, we're going to take them all down kinds of defenses. I mean, we had more air defenses in CENTCOM as a whole than we would ever have around the president, and hundreds of hits were made by the Iranians on multiple U.S. installations. The Secret Service walking around with just a handful of anti-drone guns is going to do nothing against a swarm of even 50 Shaheds that are coming that way. I mean, that would be an unwinnable fight for them.
Yeah, it's just a lot of questions about the whole Cuba threat and stuff like that. A lot of question marks left with it.
Yeah, I would just have to say, though, to get back to answering the question and wrapping it up, I feel like this whole thing's being overblown or kind of made up at this point, really, for that one reason that I'm mentioning about the president literally hanging out within less than an hour's distance from a possible strike from the Cubans, if this information is true. So I hope that has addressed that the best I can. And we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Big Ron, who said, does anybody else get the feeling that both the United States and Europe might have messed up by giving Ukraine all the support over the past 4 years? I mean, I don't think that. I mean, personally, I'd be curious to know why you think that personally. But I mean, Ukraine's done a fantastic job. I mean, but also, like, let's look at it from two different perspectives. On the Ukraine side, supporting democracy inside of Ukraine, they've done a great job. They've held their ground against a country that was supposed to defeat them in 3 days. So they've clearly used the equipment quite effectively. They're still standing after 4+ years. Also, on the U.S. interest side of things, our interest is wearing down Russia. That's what we want to do. We want to deplete Russia's weapon stocks. That way, they're basically essentially a toothless tiger at that point. They really can't do anything. Or a toothless bear, since they like to call themselves the bears of Russia. So that's what we want in the United States, or at least we used to want that. I'm not sure if we want that anymore, but we want Russia weak. We want them feeble. We want them vulnerable, so that way they can't mess with anybody else. And we want Ukraine to win because, of course, we preserve democracy. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that the support we've given to Ukraine has been well worthwhile. We've been able to see that one of our largest military adversaries on the planet, and particularly the largest threat that we see in Europe, has been ground to a pulp economically and militarily by a country that most people didn't even really know of before the war started. It cost us approximately about $30 billion per year when we were supporting them, and to put that into context, for the U.S. to directly fight Iran for about 2 months, it cost us $75 billion, which is a little bit over $30 billion a month. We were giving Ukraine $30 billion a year to grind Russia down to the point that they did right now. We were able to avoid an entire world war at this point, a direct one, with Ukraine fighting the Russians. We've been able to protect our interests and stop further Russian expansion westwards into the rest of Europe, which has been a clear foreign policy prerogative of Putin's government inside of Russia. And not only that, we have seen that the Ukrainians have developed an entirely new and cutting-edge military doctrine that if we use their knowledge, experience, and teachings on, the United States can continue to remain the premier military power world over and use the most cutting-edge technology and doctrine to be able to defeat any enemy that we go up against at any point, probably for the next 10 to 15 years, I would assume, because doctrines usually last that long. So I would say, and also on top of that, the Ukrainians are definitely reciprocal with the support. We helped them out for years, and now they're offering to give us endless amounts of their own domestically produced drones that are some of the best on the, well, they are the best on the planet for now, and also training to go with it. I mean, there's no other country out there on the planet right now that would be able to give us that kind of an edge in most land warfare and also littoral naval warfare, except for them. So I would say that it's been a humongous benefit. I would say that as far as the U.S. supporting Ukraine, I would really say that there's no regrets. Strategically, economically, and politically, it's been a major success to support the Ukrainians. And it's also shown that the Russians conventionally are so weak at this point that they really couldn't pose any sort of a threat conventionally to our allies. The only thing that they could try and do is threaten some sort of a nuclear recourse, which would be an option they'll probably not pursue because that could lead to their very own destruction if they tried to go down that route. So, in short,
also, it's like we really haven't even this whole $300 billion number that keeps getting tossed around that the U.S. has given $300 billion to Ukraine. That's a complete fabricated bullcrap lie. We haven't given $300 billion to Ukraine. And total military support, the actual value of the equipment that's been sent, I think, is hovering around 120 billion. But there's a big asterisk with that, a very big asterisk. A lot of that equipment that is being counted as the 120 billion was equipment that the U.S. military was planning on scrapping anyway. It was the old scraps. It was old equipment that was generally going to be replaced with newer equipment. And instead of scrapping it, we simply marked it off the books and counted it as aid to Ukraine and sent it over there to Ukraine. Now, granted, not everything we sent to Ukraine was old and nasty and stuff like that. There was still decent equipment that was sent. But the value of 120 billion is not taking into account that equipment was probably, not the best shape. So people don't ever take that into consideration. Also, that $300 billion number is bogus. I keep hearing that repeated over and over and over. I would ask somebody to point me to a document that says $300 billion in military aid. I don't see that anywhere.
Well, also, even if it was, like, here's what's so lame about that argument. Let's say, for the sake of this argument, that it was $300 billion that was given to them for 3 years. So that's broken down to $100 billion a year. It cost us $75 billion to fight Iran for 2 months. So if we're looking at it even still, for Ukraine to fight a war a year over, if that number is true, which it isn't even close to being true, it cost Ukraine the amount it cost us to fight Iran for 2 months, and they were able to fight were able to fight Russia for an entire year off of basically the same amount of money in terms of military support. I mean, without a doubt, no matter if it's $100 billion that we gave them over 3 years, or you inflate that by 300% to $300 billion, it was still far more economical to just give Ukraine the weapons, the bombs and whatnot, and let them fight the Russians than it is for us to fight the Russians directly at some point, which with how the Russians are operating these days, if we had let them steamroll Ukraine, we would be in World War III right now in the Baltics, and we would be directly fighting the Russians, and we would be incurring those kinds of costs trying to defend our allies over in Europe and protect our interests around the world.
It's hard to make that argument to people that don't follow it very closely. It's very hard to make that argument. Also, that's why the whole rhetoric about, oh, we don't need to support Ukraine, that's why it gains momentum, because unless you're familiar with all the details about how Russia operates, their current ambitions and Putin's mindset, you would think, well, Russia wouldn't attack the Baltics, that's attacking NATO, and that would be like, taking the nation down to destruction, and that would destroy Russia. But I mean, technically speaking, everybody said that about invading Ukraine too. I remember distinctly before the Ukraine war started, I was going around screeching like a crow, like hey, they're about to invade Ukraine, they're about to invade it, and everybody was telling me, no, they're not about to invade Ukraine. What are you, crazy? They're not going to invade Ukraine. That's wild talk. That's crazy. And what happened like a couple weeks after I said that? Russia invaded Ukraine in a whopping, shocking attack, literally with helicopters, tanks, etc. And that was 4 years ago. So don't put anything past Russia, because Putin's mindset is really wacko, and he really thinks that somehow he's going to restart the Russian Empire. He really thinks that. And that's why we're seeing drones going into Baltic states. We're seeing Lithuania get hit. We're seeing Finland deal with it. And, Romania, Moldova, etc. Because he really thinks like that.
Man, you know what's crazy, folks, is that Matthew actually did say before the war started that the Russians were going to invade Ukraine, and the person that he's probably referencing that told him that he was wrong was me. And the reason why I said that, like, the reason
I was say that,
I remember saying this to Matthew, folks, before the war started. I said, Matthew, that's absolutely stupid. Russia knows that their military sucks. They get their asses beat, probably, and on top of that, they're going to get economically destroyed by the world when they throw a whole bunch of sanctions on them for that. I said, this is absolutely stupid for them. This basically be killing off their own country. 4 years later, that ended up being true. But the thing that was wrong is that I said that they would clearly keep that in mind, and that the Russian government was smart enough to think that far ahead in the future, and therefore they wouldn't go to war with Ukraine. Turns out they did. But then everything else I said about them before the war started ended up being true as to why they wouldn't want to go to war. And now we're watching it happen 4 years later, still to this day. So
I remember I was fighting an uphill battle back in the day. I was in college at that time. I remember, debating it with political science professors who were like, "That's crazy!" Like they were scoffing at it and stuff like that. Andrew was debating it with me and saying it wasn't really didn't make much sense. But I was looking. I was on Twitter back then too. Obviously, that wasn't running our current Twitter account back then. But I was on Twitter looking at all the news coming out. I was doing my own version of OSINT analysis way back in the day on politics and geopolitics back then. And I remember seeing all the signs. I was like, they're going to invade. I'm like, this is clear as a bell. I didn't know as much about Russia's strategy back then that I do now. Like I knew like a fraction of what I know now about it, and I could see that they were going to invade then. To me, it seemed pretty clear.
You know what's kind of lucky though, folks, is that before this war started, I had a humongous fascination with the Ukraine war, and so I had done all of this reading for the years leading up to it, from like 2019 to 2022, for years, just like in my free time, on that war, how the Russians fought that war, and then everything the Russians did since they became a country in 1991 as a separate part of the Soviet Union. And so I remember telling Matthew, do you remember me saying this kind of stuff? I was like, Matthew, they just won't invade. They have like huge logistics issues. They don't really have good communication systems. Their army is fairly inefficient. I said, there's just no way that they would do that, because they even know that their army wouldn't be able to fight a war like that properly. They run into a whole bunch of problems. And then you were like, no, man, I swear they're going to war. And I was like, no, man.
The only thing I will admit, because I'm not ashamed to say when I get something wrong, I was right about the invasion starting, but the one thing I was wrong about, I didn't put much faith in the Ukrainians. I was one of those people. I wasn't saying it was going to last 3 days. I didn't say that, but I was like, I think Russia is going to defeat Ukraine. I'm not ashamed to say that. I was falling for the whole propaganda narrative back in the day that Putin really had it all together, and that he was somehow going to just steamroll Ukraine. Because they had built up this massive image that they were just a formidable superpower. They were going to go through and do what they wanted to do when they needed to defend their country. And that was very wrong. All the people, including myself, that thought Ukraine was going to be the underdog and they were going to go out badly, turned out to be extremely wrong on that one. So Ukraine proved me wrong big time. Yeah, you got that one right. So we're 1 for 1.
because I didn't think that they'd start the war because I thought it was just absolutely stupid. Like it is the equivalent of national seppuku for the Russians to try and pull this thing off. They were going to destroy themselves, and that's why I was telling Matthew. I was like, they clearly know that that's going to happen. That would be absolutely ridiculous for them to do this. And so then when the war started, I was of the mindset then that the Ukrainians were probably going to be able to hold out. Because I was like, because I had read a whole bunch, folks, about how they fought the first and second Chechen war, and then also how they invaded Georgia in 2008 to 2009. And so I had a pretty good understanding of what the Russian army actually looked like in war, to know that they were going to run into a million different problems, and they ran into all of them at the very opening week of the war. They had that 50-mile-long convoy north of Kyiv that was stuck on the highway because they didn't plan everything out properly. They were also running into a whole bunch of other problems and other offensives elsewhere in the country, and it was already falling apart within the first week. And so Matthew and me were in huge debates, I would say, for probably like the first 6 months of the war. Matthew's like, I don't think they're going to last that much longer. And I was like, no, these people are going to hold out because the Russian army is just not good. I said, and then I brought up all of the reforms that were done to the Ukrainian army after the 2014 Donbass conflict, where Petro Poroshenko, who was the president at the time, started to reform the Ukrainian army into a contract-only, volunteer-only force that was much more trained and had a lot higher morale. And also, on top of that, all of the social implications that happened because of the Donbass conflict, which largely created a very strong spirit of national defense and strong nationalism in Ukraine versus Russia's nationalism that was largely forced and wasn't really organic. And I was looking at all that, and I was like, these people are going to hold out. I mean, there's no question about it. As long as they get support, they'll be fine. And that ended up being correct. Correct, but I was actually wrong on whether the war would start or not. I thought it wouldn't.
Yeah, I got to say, after watching the Ukrainians for 4+ years, I've learned never underestimate the Ukrainians, and that's just from viewing them for 4 years. I mean, we've been watching them literally on every single move they've made for 4+ years. The Ukrainians have wowed me every single year. Like there's been moments where I've thought, oh, it looks like things might start turning against the Ukrainians, like the Russian offensive sometimes will end up pushing the Ukrainians back, and I was like, oh, it looks like things are starting to go a different direction. But Ukraine always pulls a rabbit out of the hat every single time when you least expect it. They do stuff like Operation Spiderweb, which catches people off guard. They end up invading into Russia, which caught people off guard. Also helping to spurn possible coups inside of Russia too. I mean, it's just shocking. And they're going up against a country that's nuclear armed, and they're, obviously smaller than Russia. So you just can't underestimate them. They're truly a formidable force.
And then y'all can see, folks, right there, how the foreign policy analysis, really all of our analysis works, because Matthew's a political science guy. That's his degree. And my degree is a history degree. And I've tried to get into military history as much as I could. So he got it right that the Russians were going to go to war because of his general background and base of knowledge. Then I got it right that they were going to hold out, the Ukrainians would, longer than a lot of people thought at the time, because I was more so on the martial side of things, the historical side of things, of how the last years had gone starting into that war. So that's how we complement each other really well. And we end up getting the really kind of well-rounded analysis and information that we get on the channel because we work together as a team. Wherever one of us has any form of a shortcoming, the other one comes in pretty much clutch to fill in that shortcoming with actual credible information. That's really the start of the channel. That's really the start of the whole channel right there, way back in the day. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to get on and into one more super chat, and then we're going to be getting on into the final question of the night. So what do we got, Matthew?
So this one here is actually a donation to the fundraiser. It's a $50 donation from Cerebrus3, and a huge shout out to Cerebrus for that generous donation once again, and helping to get us up to $3,881 raised as of right now. We also have our final question of the night, which is going to go to Marks, who said the global South got Russian oil before sanctions got back up. What are ideas that can be done to help them, like the Philippines and Malaysia?
Sadly, there really isn't any way to help because due to the material lack of oil that exists in the world at the moment, and also due to the fact that we're not going to lift the sanctions on the Russians to be able to alleviate their financial conditions, we generally can find that the only way to help people is not by directly trying to help them, but trying to indirectly help them by reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Unfortunately, that is pretty much the answer to everything in the world right now that's a problem is that we need to go and use a battering ram on the Strait of Hormuz and forcibly reopen it. That's really the only answer that we have that will work. So I hope that it does address that the best that I can. And with that, folks, after 3 hours and 30 minutes on air, we have reached the end of this stream today with an incredibly good question, by the way. And I got to say that it's an absolute honor and a pleasure once again to be able to cover this news for each and every single one of y'all. We had 20,000 viewers here at the peak tonight. That is a lot of people. And we also had 176,000 people watch this stream before it ended. I've got to say that we're entirely honored and greatly appreciative to have had each and every single one of y'all here once again enjoying this news, and I hope that we've been able to present it incredibly well to y'all tonight with a great deal of factuality and a great deal of good analysis and reporting to go with it. Of course.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. I coughed into the mic. It hit the back of the throat rather suddenly.
I mean, I was about to do that. I'm sorry. It hit the back of the throat that suddenly. But I do have to thank you all so much once again for watching. And I also got to say that the fundraiser has been absolutely unbelievable tonight. And I've got to thank each and every single one of y'all as well for supporting this fundraiser and being here on such a momentous night, as we've been able to raise a significant sum for Razom For Ukraine to help them out with their incredible work inside of Ukraine and around the world to be able to continue to help out the Ukrainian cause. So a humongous thanks to all of y'all so much once again. And we will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of news from around the world. If there is enough news for a short war video tomorrow, I'll be the one making that short war video. But once again, folks, it depends on how much news comes out at the right time of day, because we have to basically have all the stars aligned to be able to make one of those videos these days. Otherwise, there might not be enough news out to make one yet, and for that reason, there might not be one. But I do thank you all so much once again, and with that, we will see you either for the short war video tomorrow or on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, Razom Slava, long live the Leaf Spring Army, and long live the Republic.
And with that, folks, thank you all to the 176,000 plus people. That's a whopping amount of people here by the end of the stream tonight. We appreciate all of you for choosing us as your news source. And we will see you tomorrow on that short war video midday if there is enough news to cover. And also, by the way, if there is anything that happens by happenstance tomorrow on Monday, we will, of course, do an emergency live stream to cover that. But we'll have to see, though. Right now, the timing is not super clear, which keeps us in limbo. Just as a behind-the-scenes note, we actually have to stay in limbo while stuff like this is happening, because we don't want to miss the breaking news happening. So we kind of have to, like, lurk around our places whenever this stuff happens. We really can't just go out and go do something, on the off date. We have to lurk. So tomorrow it's raining anyway, so we're lurking regardless. But anyways, though, we will see you all tomorrow on that short war video, and we'll definitely see you on Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern for the next Night of the War News stream, and that is a guarantee. But of course, thank you all once again, and Slava Ukraine, Herom Slava, get some rest, and good night.